The
You
rain
think
had
that
been
toy will
falling
save
for
you,
3 days
kid?
straight.
Stay
Not a
back!
cleansing storm that scrubs the world raw and leaves everything smelling of ozone and second chances. This was Portland no rain. Cold, relentless, patient as a debt collector. It seeped through concrete and cotton and skin until it found bone, and once it reached bone, it settled there like it had always belonged. The textile district wore it like a shroud. Gray brick and grayer sky bled into each other until the buildings looked like they were dissolving brick by brick into the clouds above them. Steam from the street grates tangled with exhaust fumes and coiled upward through the alleys, creating a low fog that softened every edge, muted every sound, made the whole neighborhood feel like something remembered rather than something real. Emmett Brannigan loved the rain, not in the way people love warm fires or good meals or the voices of people who care about them. He loved it the way a hunted animal loves tall grass. Rain kept people indoors. Rain erased footprints. Rain turned a 17-year-old boy into just another shadow in a city built from shadows, and shadows were invisible, and invisible meant alive. He sat in the recessed doorway of an abandoned loading dock on 4th Avenue, his back pressed against a metal door that had once been painted red, but had long since oxidized to the color of old blood. Rust flaked off against his jacket whenever he shifted. The overhang was deep enough to shield him from the worst of the downpour, and the ventilation duct from the bakery next door exhaled warm air that carried the ghosts of cinnamon rolls and sourdough loaves. On cold nights, that vent was the closest thing to a fireplace he had. On cold mornings, the smell of bread baking was the closest thing to someone cooking breakfast. 8 months. That was how long he had been out here. 243 days, though he had stopped counting somewhere around day 90, because counting made the number real, and real numbers had weight. And weight was something a boy living on scraps could not afford to carry. His clothes told the story his face had learned to hide. An oversized army surplus jacket, olive drab, 3 sizes too large with a tear in the left shoulder seam that admitted the cold like an uninvited guest. Jeans cinched at the waist with a length of nylon rope because the belt loops had rotted through weeks ago. Sneakers with soles worn so thin he could feel the texture of every crack in the pavement, every pebble, every shard of broken glass that the city scattered like confetti across its forgotten corners. His blonde hair darkened with grease, and matted flat disappeared beneath a black knit cap he had pulled from a dumpster behind a thrift store on Burnside. The cap smelled faintly of mothballs and someone else's life. At 17, Emmett Brannigan had perfected the art of being nothing. The trick was simple enough in theory. If you did not look people in the eye, they did not see you. If you did not move, you became architecture. A pile of rags, a lump of shadow, a piece of the city's furniture that everyone walked past without registering, the same way they walked past fire hydrants and parking meters and all the other objects that existed without mattering. He was not an addict. He was not mentally ill. He was not any of the things that people assumed when they saw a teenager sleeping rough. He was a boy who had learned through careful and painful education that sleeping under a bridge in January was safer than sleeping in a warm bed in the house of a man named Pemberton. The memory surfaced before he could push it down. It always did when the rain got heavy and the cold made his muscles lock up, and his body remembered what it felt like to be small and trapped in a space with no light. 8 months ago, a Tuesday night in May, Pemberton's house on Maple Terrace, a street so aggressively suburban it should have come with a warning. The house was clean, the lawn was mowed, the recycling bins were sorted into perfect categories. From the outside, it looked like safety. It looked like the brochure the social workers showed you when they said this one will be different. Emmett had lasted 11 months in that house. 11 months of locked basement doors and withheld meals, and a man who smiled for the caseworkers and transformed the moment their taillights disappeared down the driveway. Pemberton never left marks that showed up in photographs. He was too smart for that. His cruelty was architectural, designed, load-bearing. He knew exactly how much pressure a child could absorb before breaking, and he kept the dial precisely one notch below that threshold. The night Emmett ran Pemberton had locked him in the basement for refusing to hand over a letter. A letter from a social worker named Mrs. Thornton, who had asked Emmett directly whether he felt safe in the placement. Emmett had written yes because Pemberton was standing behind Mrs. Thornton's chair smiling, and Emmett had learned that the truth did not matter when you were a foster kid. The system believed the adults. Always. But Pemberton wanted the letter anyway. Wanted to read it. wanted to make sure nothing had slipped through, no coded cry for help, no carefully chosen word that might plant a seed of doubt in some bureaucrat's mind. Emmett refused, not out of bravery, out of exhaustion. The refusal of a boy who had simply run out of room to retreat. The basement was cold. The door was locked. The darkness was absolute. Emmett waited until the house went quiet. Then he climbed onto a storage shelf, pushed open a narrow window at ground level, squeezed through a gap that tore the skin on both forearms, dropped into the hydrangea bushes, and ran. He did not pack a bag. He did not take food or money or a phone. He took nothing except the clothes on his back and a decision that he would rather die in the open than live in a cage. Pemberton reported him missing the next day. Told the police the boy had stolen $200 from a coffee can in the kitchen. Filed the paperwork. Checked the boxes. The state issued a warrant. Juvenile delinquency. Emmett Brannigan, age 16 at the time, was now a fugitive from a system that had never once asked him the right questions. He had not touched that money. He knew no one would believe him. Belief was a luxury the system did not extend to children. So he disappeared. He survived on soup kitchen meals served by volunteers who looked through him rather than at him. On day labor jobs at construction sites where foremen paid cash and did not ask for identification. On the mathematics of invisibility, which he refined daily, learning which doorways offered the best shelter, which dumpsters, behind which restaurants yielded edible food, on which nights, which bridges had camps that tolerated newcomers, and which would rob you while you slept. His only possession of real value leaned against the brick wall beside him. 3 feet of solid hickory, dense and heavy, cut from an industrial broom handle he had found in a construction dumpster near the Pearl District. The wood had a grain so tight it felt almost like stone. He had wrapped one end with black electrical tape for grip, layering it thick until it molded to the shape of his palm. The other end he had sanded smooth against a concrete wall, working it down night after night until it felt balanced in his hands. It was not a cane. It was not decoration. It was a weapon. For the stray dogs that roamed the industrial district after dark, feral and starving and willing to fight anything that looked weak. For the men who came down to the camps after the bars closed looking for sport, looking for someone who could not fight back, who would not be missed, who did not exist in any database or any system that counted. For the moments when invisibility failed and the world noticed you and the world was hostile. Emmett checked his watch, a cheap plastic digital model he had pulled from the trash bin behind a pawn shop. The face was cracked and the numbers were fading, but the time still held. 3:58 in the afternoon. Almost time. His pulse shifted. Not much. Just a small acceleration, a warmth behind his sternum that had nothing to do with the bakery vent. Every Tuesday she came. He did not know her name, did not know anything about her except what he had assembled from weeks of silent observation. She drove a black Jeep Wrangler, pristine, the kind of vehicle that said its owner took care of things. She parked in this alley at almost exactly 4 o'clock every Tuesday afternoon. She walked from the alley to the university campus 3 blocks east, and she returned to the Jeep approximately 2 hours later. She was beautiful, but the word felt inadequate, like calling the ocean wet. It described a surface and missed everything underneath. She moved with a physicality that most college-aged women did not possess. There was no carefree bounce in her step, no earbuds blocking out the world, no phone-glazed oblivion. She walked with her head on a constant pivot, eyes scanning corners and roof lines and parked vehicles with the efficiency of someone who had been trained to assess threats. She wore leather jackets that fit like armor and boots heavy enough to kick through a locked door. Emmett told himself he watched her because the alley was his territory, because a good survivor tracked patterns, because knowing who came and went through your space was basic operational security. But the truth was simpler than that and more painful. He watched her because she was the only beautiful thing left in his world. Because for 60 seconds every Tuesday, as she stepped out of the Jeep and walked toward the campus, he could pretend he was a normal 17-year-old watching a pretty girl walk by. A boy who might have a chance. A boy who existed in the same world she did, a world of classes and weekend plans and futures that stretched out ahead like open highway. Then she would disappear around the corner and the 60 seconds would end and Emmett would go back to being invisible. The sound of an engine cut through the rain. He looked up. The black Jeep turned into the alley headlights, slicing through the mist. It rolled forward, tires hissing on the wet pavement, and stopped in its usual spot, 20 yards from where Emmett sat hidden in the recessed doorway. The engine died. The lights went dark. The driver's door opened and she stepped out. Gray hoodie beneath a denim jacket, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that was already collecting raindrops. She locked the Jeep with a soft chirp, then reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her thumb moved across the screen, scrolling through something. For once, her attention was divided. For once, she was not scanning the corners. Emmett heard it before he saw it. The screech of tires, high and sharp, cutting through the ambient murmur of rain on brick. A white Ford Transit van came around the corner too fast, its rear end swinging wide on the wet asphalt. It did not slow down. It did not hesitate. It angled hard, blocking the mouth of the alley, boxing the Jeep in with the precision of something rehearsed. Emmett sat up straight. His hand found the hickory stick without conscious thought, fingers closing around the tape grip. The van's side door slid open before the vehicle had fully stopped. 3 men poured out. The first was thick-necked, gym-built, with a tattoo of a scorpion crawling up the left side of his throat. Renko. The name would come later, but the scorpion Emmett would never forget. The second wore a bomber jacket despite the rain. Tall, heavy through the chest and shoulders, with a face as flat and expressionless as a cinder-block wall. Griggs, though Emmett did not know that yet either. The third was leaner than the others. Quicker. He moved with a mechanical efficiency that suggested repetition, muscle memory, a body that had performed this exact sequence many times before. Darnell. None of them were wearing masks. That detail hit Emmett like ice water poured down his spine. His brain processed it instantly, automatically, the way a prey animal processes the snap of a twig in the underbrush. No mask meant they were not worried about being identified. No mask meant they had already decided how this ended for anyone who saw their faces. No mask meant no witnesses. The girl saw them. She dropped her phone. Her hand went into her bag, fast, reaching for something. Mace, or a taser, or maybe something more. She did not scream. She did not freeze. She pivoted. Her boot came up in a sharp, practiced arc and connected with Darnell's kneecap. The crack was audible even from 20 yards away. Darnell's leg buckled. He went down, cursing, clutching his knee, his face contorted with shock and pain. But there were 3 of them. Griggs came in from the left side, low and fast, driving his shoulder into her midsection, slamming her backward into the Jeep. The sound of her skull striking the metal door frame was a sound Emmett would hear in his sleep for months. A thick, wet thud that echoed off the brick walls and seemed to hang in the air after it was over. She sagged. Her eyes went glassy. Blood began to trickle from her hairline, mixing with the rain running down the side of her face in a thin red line. Renko grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her head back. Darnell, limping, enraged, grabbed her legs. They began dragging her toward the open van. Emmett's heart was slamming against his ribs so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Every instinct he had honed over 8 months of survival was screaming, "Not your business, not your fight. Stay invisible. Stay alive. You are 130 pounds of bone and hunger. They have knives. They probably have guns. You will die in this alley and no one will even know your name." He looked at the empty street beyond the van. No pedestrians, no cars, just the rain in the van and the girl being dragged toward a door she would not come back through. He looked at the hickory stick in his hands. He thought about Pemberton, about the basement, about the nights he had curled into a ball in the dark corner and pressed his hands over his ears and told himself that if he just stayed quiet, if he just made himself small enough, it would be over sooner. All those times he had looked away, all those times he had chosen invisibility over action, all those times he had survived by being nothing. Emmett was so tired of being nothing. He stood up. His legs felt disconnected from his body, moving on their own, carrying him forward without permission. One step, then another. His hand tightened around the stick until the tape bit into his palm. 20 yards. The men did not notice him. They were focused on the girl, on getting her into the van, on finishing what they had started with professional efficiency. 15 yards. Darnell was bent over, gripping her ankles, his back to Emmett. Renko was pulling her by the hair. Griggs was reaching for the van door, widening the opening. 10 yards. Emmett did not think. Thinking would have killed him. Thinking would have reminded him of the math, the physics, the certain outcome of a starving boy with a stick against three armed men. 5 yards. He raised the hickory like a baseball bat. He put everything he had into the swing. Every missed meal, every cold night, every locked door, every time someone told him he was worthless, and he believed them. The wood connected with the back of Darnell's injured knee. The sound was a dry, structural crack, like a branch snapping under too much weight. Darnell screamed. His leg folded beneath him, and he went down hard face first into the puddled rainwater. Renko spun. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened. Emmett drove the end of the stick forward like a spear, slamming it into Renko's solar plexus with both hands behind it. The impact traveled up through the hickory and into Emmett's arms. Renko's lungs emptied in a single wet gasp. He doubled over, hands clutching his chest, wheezing like a man drowning on dry land. The girl was on the ground, teed, blood running from the cut on her forehead. She looked up at Emmett with unfocused eyes, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. A filthy, wild-eyed boy, gaunt as a scarecrow, holding a stick like a sword, standing between her and three men who had been about to erase her from the world. Griggs turned toward him. He was smiling. He reached into his bomber jacket and pulled out a switchblade, 6 inches of steel that caught the gray afternoon light and threw it back in a cold, clean flash. The click of the blade locking into place was a small sound, intimate, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. Emmett backed up. His hands were trembling. The stick wavered in front of him like a conductor's baton in an earthquake. Griggs lunged. Emmett swung. A desperate wide arc that caught Griggs on the forearm. The impact jarred Emmett's wrists. But Griggs was riding adrenaline and rage, and the blow barely slowed him. He grabbed the stick with his free hand and yanked. Emmett flew forward, off balance, weightless for a fraction of a second. The knife came up. Emmett twisted. Instinct, reflex. The muscle memory of a boy who had spent years dodging fists and boots and thrown objects in houses where love was something that happened to other children. The blade sliced through the fabric of his jacket and drew a burning line across his ribs. The pain was immediate and enormous, a streak of fire across his left side that made his vision flash white. But Griggs had made an error. He was still holding the stick, his momentum committed to the pull, and when Emmett released his grip, the sudden absence of resistance sent Griggs stumbling backward. Emmett did not retreat. He scrambled onto the hood of the Jeep's sneakers, sliding on the wet metal, and launched himself at Griggs. His heel caught the man square in the bridge of the nose. Cartilage crunched. Blood sprayed. Griggs staggered back, roaring, both hands going to his face. Behind him, Renko had recovered enough to breathe. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a handgun. Black, compact. The barrel seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Time fractured. Emmett saw everything with a clarity that felt surgical. The raindrops frozen in midair. The blood on Griggs's face mixing with the rainwater on the pavement. The girl on the ground, her eyes suddenly sharp, focused her hand inside her jacket, closing around something. The gun came up. Renko's hand was steady. His face was a mask of pain and fury, but his hand was steady. Then the girl moved. She pulled a yellow and black device from her jacket. A taser. She did not warn. She did not hesitate. She did not negotiate. She aimed and she fired. 2 metal prongs shot forward on thin wires and embedded themselves in Renko's neck and shoulder. 50,000 volts of electricity locked every muscle in his body rigid. His back arched. His fingers spasmed open. The gun clattered to the wet pavement. He fell like a tree cut at the base, twitching and convulsing in the puddles. Griggs' blood, streaming through his fingers, looked at Renko on the ground, looked at the gun in the puddle, looked at Emmett standing on the hood of the Jeep, bleeding and breathing hard, holding nothing but his fists. Darnell was still down, clutching his destroyed knee, whimpering. Griggs did the math. It took less than a second. He grabbed Renko under the arms and began dragging him toward the van. Darnell hobbled after them, leaving a trail of blood on the wet asphalt. The van's engine roared. Tires spun and smoked on the slick pavement. The vehicle lurched forward, sideswiped a dumpster with a shriek of metal, and disappeared into the rain. Silence. Emmett stood on the hood of the Jeep. His chest was heaving. His entire body was vibrating with adrenaline that had no outlet. Rain fell on his upturned face and mixed with sweat and blood. And something else. His side burned where the blade had opened the skin, a long, shallow cut that pulsed hot with every heartbeat. Then he heard sirens. The sound hit him harder than the knife. Sirens meant police. Police meant questions. Questions meant identification. Identification meant the system. The system meant Pemberton. He slid off the hood, his sneakers splashed in the puddles. He grabbed his hickory stick from where it lay near the Jeep, splintered at one end, but still solid. The girl was standing now, leaning against the Jeep, one hand pressed to her forehead, her legs unsteady. But her eyes were locked on him, sharp, seeing everything. "You are bleeding," she said. "So are you," Emmett managed. His voice came out rough, unused. Words were dangerous things. Words made you visible. The sirens grew louder. "I have to go," he said. "Wait." She reached toward him, but did not touch. Her hand hung in the air between them. "What is your name?" "Does not matter. Please. You saved my life." He looked at the gun lying in the puddle near the front tire. "Hide that," he said. "Do not tell them I was here. They will put me back in the homes." She stared at him. Back in the homes. The words landed on her face and rearranged something there. Understanding, horror, recognition. But Emmett was already moving. He turned toward the deep shadows of the textile district, toward the maze of abandoned loading docks and boarded-up warehouses where the city lost interest in looking. "Thank you," she called after him. Her voice cracked on the second word. Emmett did not look back. He ran, one hand pressed to his bleeding side, and the rain swallowed him whole. Rowan Calloway was running a straight flush when the phone rang. The Steel Reapers clubhouse occupied a converted auto body shop on Portland's industrial east side. Concrete floors stained with decades of motor oil. Exposed steel beams hung with banners and flags, and the kind of motorcycle parts that qualified as industrial sculpture. The air carried the permanent scent of engine, grease, cold beer, and the particular ozone that radiated from men who had chosen to live outside the boundaries the rest of the world agreed upon. There were 32 men in the building that afternoon. Every one of them wore a leather cut bearing the Steel Reaper's crest, a grinning skull wrapped in chain over a rocker that read Portland. Some played cards. Some worked on bikes in the back bay. Some sat at the long bar that ran along the south wall, drinking and watching a Blazers game on a mounted television. The atmosphere was easy, loose, the particular calm of a Tuesday afternoon when business was good and the law was looking the other direction. Rowan was at the pool table lining up a bank shot that required precision and patience. His leather cut, more faded and more decorated than anyone else's in the room, creaked softly as he leaned across the green felt. 52 years old, built like a man who had spent 3 decades lifting engine blocks and swinging fists, with a face carved from some northern stone and gray eyes that could go from warm to empty in the space between heartbeats. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. The shot mattered. The cue ball kissed the 7, sent it off 2 rails, and dropped it into the corner pocket with a satisfying snap. His phone rang again. And again. "Answer the phone," Dex Sledge said from across the table. The club's vice president was a man whose arms were thicker than most people's thighs, with a beard that had achieved a kind of geological permanence. Rowan straightened and pulled out the phone. The name on the screen changed everything. Officer Whitfield, a Portland PD detective who existed in the gray space between law enforcement and the Steel Reapers' sphere of influence. Whitfield only called when the world was about to tilt. Rowan stepped away from the table and pressed the phone to his ear. St. Jude's Hospital. Whitfield's voice was clipped, compressed, delivering bad news with surgical efficiency. "Trauma unit. Your daughter." The room went silent. 32 men in leather, every one of them a convicted felon, or close enough, all watching their president. They could read the change in his posture, the way a herd reads a predator's approach. The shoulders locking, the jaw tightening, the eyes going flat and cold. "She is alive," Whitfield continued quickly. "Head injury. Stitches. But she is alive. Someone tried to grab her. Professional. Snatch and grab in broad daylight." Rowan hung up. He did not need to hear more. He looked around the room at the men who called him brother. Men who had bled with him, done time with him, buried friends with him. They saw his face and they knew. "Saddle up," Rowan said. His voice was quiet, but it traveled to every corner of the building, and it vibrated in the concrete floor beneath their boots. Someone touched Maeve. The clubhouse erupted. 20 motorcycles screaming into St. Jude's parking lot at the same time was the kind of arrival that made hospital security reconsider career choices. The emergency room entrance became a wall of leather and chrome and barely restrained violence. Nurses stepped aside. Orderlies pressed against walls. A security guard started toward the automatic doors, saw what was coming through them, and decided that his shift had just ended. Rowan found Maeve on the fourth floor. Private room, curtains drawn, an IV line in her arm, 6 stitches and a cut near her hairline, a concussion, a bruise on her cheek already turning the color of a storm cloud. She looked small in the hospital gown, fragile in a way that made Rowan's scarred hands tremble. He sat in the plastic chair beside her bed and took her hand. His fingers, mapped with old scars and engine grease that never fully washed away, were careful, gentle. Who, he said, one word, quiet enough to be a whisper, heavy enough to be a death sentence. Maeve's eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, but sharp beneath the fatigue. 3 men, she said, white van, had Miller and Sons plumbing on the side. No masks. Sledge spoke from the doorway. Fake plates. Van was stolen 2 days ago from a construction yard in Beaverton. They had me, Dad. Maeve's voice cracked on the word. They had me, and I could not stop all 3. But they did not take you, Rowan said. How? Maeve hesitated. She remembered the boy, wild-eyed and starving, bursting out of the shadows with a stick in his hands and nothing in his future. She remembered his voice, raw and cracked, telling her to run. She remembered him standing on the hood of her Jeep like some ruined angel, bleeding and shaking and refusing to fall. She remembered what he said. Do not tell them I was here. They will put me back in the homes. I fought them off, Maeve lied. Tased one. They ran when they heard sirens. Rowan studied his daughter's face. He had known her for 20 years. He knew every tell, every micro-expression, every shift in her breathing that signaled the gap between what she was saying and what she was thinking. She was lying. He was certain. 3 professionals, Rowan said quietly, and you handled them alone. Maeve met his eyes and held them. I handled it, Dad. Rowan kissed her forehead above the stitches. He walked out to the hallway where Sledge and Flint, the club's sergeant-at-arms, were waiting. She is protecting someone, Rowan said. Flint cracked his scarred knuckles. Who? That is what I intend to find out. But Rowan Calloway was not the first person to find out. His daughter was. Maeve waited until her father left the room, until the sound of his boots faded down the corridor, until the low rumble of his voice giving orders to Sledge dissolved into the ambient hum of the hospital. Then she picked up her phone. The screen was cracked from where she had dropped it in the alley, but it still worked. She pulled up a contact. Spark. 23 years old, rail-thin fingers that could navigate a keyboard the way concert pianists navigated Chopin. He had done time for hacking Portland PD's network and now worked for the Steel Reapers in a capacity that kept him barely on the legal side of the line. Maeve did not call. She texted. Text left less evidence, made less noise, and could not be overheard by the prospects standing guard outside her door. The bakery on 4th. East Side Sourdough. They have a security camera that covers the alley where I park. I need that footage. All of it. From 3:45 to 4:15 this afternoon. Do not tell my father. Not yet. Sparks' reply came in under 30 seconds. On it. Maeve set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Her head throbbed. The stitches pulled when she frowned. But her mind was moving fast, sorting and categorizing the fragments of the afternoon, assembling a picture from broken pieces. The boy was young, 16, 17 at most, homeless. That much was obvious from the clothes, from the smell, from the hollowed-out face that spoke of months without adequate food. He had been hiding in that doorway watching her, and she had never noticed him. He had been invisible until the moment he chose not to be. He had fought 3 armed men with a wooden stick. He had taken a knife slash across his ribs to protect a stranger, and then he had run, not from the kidnappers, from the sirens, from the police, from the system. They will put me back in the homes. Maeve had grown up in the outlaw world, daughter of a man who ran a motorcycle club, who operated in the spaces between legal and illegal, who had taught her since childhood that the system was not designed to protect people like them. She had learned to shoot at 12, learned to fight at 13, learned to read a room, assess a threat, and plan 3 moves ahead by the time she entered college. She understood in a way most people never could what it meant to fear the system more than you feared the men with guns. Her phone buzzed. Spark, a video file. Grainy black and white, time-stamped 4:04 p.m. Maeve watched it 3 times. The first time she watched the boy emerge from the shadows and attack 3 men twice his size with a broom handle. She watched him take the knife cut, watched him launch himself off her Jeep hood and break Griggs's nose with his heel. Watched the taser prongs hit Renko. Watched the van peel out. The second time she watched the boy's face. Watched the terror and the determination warring across his features. Watched him press his hand to his bleeding side as he talked to her, as he begged her to hide the gun, to keep his existence a secret from the only institutions that were supposed to protect him. The third time she watched him run, watched him disappear into the textile district wounded and alone, swallowed by the very invisibility he had broken in order to save her life. Maeve sat up straighter in the hospital bed. She texted Spark again. "I need you to run something. The boy in the footage, blonde, 17 or so, homeless. He said they would put him back in the homes. That means he is in the foster system. Check juvenile records, runaway reports, missing persons. Anything in Multnomah County in the last year involving a teenage boy who disappeared from a foster placement." The reply took longer this time, 20 minutes. Maeve spent them staring at the paused video, at the frozen frame of a boy standing on the hood of her Jeep with blood soaking through his jacket and a stick in his hands and nothing else in the world. Spark's message arrived with an attachment, a scanned mugshot from 2 years ago. A boy with a bruise on his cheek looking at the camera with the resigned expression of someone who had stopped expecting anything from the people holding the camera. Emmett Brannigan, 17 years old, in the system since age 4, mother deceased overdose, father unknown, 6 foster placements in 5 years. Last placement with a Raymond Pemberton on Maple Terrace. Ran away 8 months ago. Pemberton reported theft of $200. State issued a warrant for juvenile delinquency, currently listed as a runaway. Maeve stared at the name. Emmett Brannigan. She opened a new search. Pemberton Raymond. Foster care. Complaints. The results came in pieces. 3 separate complaints filed by 3 different children over a 6-year period. Jessica Whitmore, age 14, reported being locked in the basement for 2 days. Case dismissed, insufficient evidence. Tyler Brooks, age 16, reported food being withheld as punishment. Case dismissed. Sarah Prescott, age 15. The details of her complaint were sealed, but the case was also dismissed. 3 children, 3 complaints, 3 dismissals. Maeve felt something cold settle in her chest, not anger. Anger was hot and reactive and imprecise. This was colder than that. This was calculation. She picked up her phone one more time. She did not text Spark this time. She called. 2 things she said when he answered. First, compile everything you can find on Raymond Pemberton. Court records, financial records, foster care, payment history, everything. I want to know if he is still collecting stipends for children who are not living in his house. And second, Spark asked, get me a line to Judge Morrison's clerk. I need the warrant on Emmett Brannigan withdrawn before we find him. I do not want him waking up in a hospital bed with the system waiting to drag him back. Spark paused. Your father is going to want to run this, Maeve. My father is going to want to burn things down, Maeve said. I am going to build something instead. Get me what I asked for. She hung up, took a breath. The headache was ferocious now, a pulsing knot of pain behind her stitches, but her mind was clear. When her father came back to the room 20 minutes later, with Sledge and 2 prospects carrying takeout food, Maeve was ready. Dad, she said, sit down, I need to tell you something. Rowan sat. He recognized the look on his daughter's face. It was the same look she had worn at 14 when she presented him with a detailed analysis of why the club's accounting system was vulnerable to federal RICO charges. The same look she wore when she had a plan, and the plan was already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Maeve told him everything. The bull, the stick, the knife wound, the plea to hide the gun, the fear of the system. She showed him the footage. She showed him the juvenile record. She showed him the 3 dismissed complaints against Pemberton. Then she laid out her plan. We find this boy before the cartel does. We get him medical care. But before any of that matters, we neutralize Pemberton. Because if we find Emmett and Pemberton still has legal custody, the system will hand him right back. I have already started the process to withdraw the warrant. Spark is compiling a fraud case against Pemberton, and I am working the legal channels through Morrison. Rowan stared at his daughter. The footage of the fight was still frozen on her phone screen between them. "You have been busy," he said. "That boy is bleeding somewhere in this city right now because he saved my life. I am not going to let him wake up to find out the system still owns him." Rowan looked at the frozen image of Emmett Brannigan standing on the hood of a Jeep with a stick in his hands and the posture of someone who had already accepted he was going to die. He nodded. "What do you need from me?" he asked. It was the right question. The question of a man who understood that his daughter was not asking for permission. She was assigning him a role. "Manpower," Maeve said. "Every prospect, every hang-around, every brother. Shelters, bridges, soup kitchens, camps. We are looking for a blond boy 17 carrying a hickory stick. He is wounded and scared, and he has spent 8 months learning to be invisible. He will not be easy to find. And when we find him, we bring him somewhere safe. We do not scare him. We do not grab him. He has been grabbed enough. We approach with care and we give him a choice. The first real choice anyone has given him in 17 years. Rowan stood. He looked at Sledge, who had been listening from the doorway. "You heard her," Rowan said. "Every man we have. Tear this city apart. Treat the boy like royalty." Sledge nodded once and disappeared. Rowan turned back to Maeve. "And the men who did this to you?" Maeve's eyes went hard. "One thing at a time. The boy first. He is hurt and alone, and those men are hunting him too. We find Emmett Brannigan before they do. Everything else comes after." Rowan studied his daughter for a long moment. Then he did something he rarely did. He smiled. "You are more dangerous than I ever was," he said. "I learned from the best," Maeve said. "Now go." Midnight found Emmett Brannigan huddled beneath the I-5 overpass, shivering inside a sleeping bag that smelled of mildew and someone else's misery. The cut on his ribs had stopped bleeding, but the wound was angry now, hot to the touch. The edges were swollen and puckered, radiating heat into the surrounding skin. He had cleaned it with vodka he'd taken from a man passed out near the overpass, support columns pouring the alcohol directly into the wound while biting down on a strip of leather to keep from screaming. The pain had been extraordinary, a white flash that erased thought and language and left only animal response. It needed stitches. It needed antibiotics. It needed a hospital. But hospitals meant the system, and the system meant Pemberton, and Pemberton meant the basement, and the basement meant the dark, and the dark meant everything he had run from 8 months ago. He lay on his cardboard mattress with the hickory stick beside him, close enough to grab. Sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the knife, saw the gun barrel rising, saw the girl's blood mixing with the rain. Footsteps, not the shuffling, directionless movement of homeless people navigating their nightly routines. These footsteps were deliberate, coordinated, multiple sets moving in formation. Emmett's eyes snapped open. Flashlights off, a voice from the darkness clipped and professional. The cop said the kid ran toward the waterfront. A second voice, deeper, accented just slightly enough to mark the speaker as someone from somewhere else. "The girl saw us, but she is connected. Touching her again triggers a war we are not ready to fight. The boy, though, the one who smashed Darnell's knee, he is a loose end. He dies tonight." A third voice, smooth, cultured, carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. "He does not die. He disappears. There is a difference." The smooth voice continued. "The employer wants him alive. Think about it. The girl's father runs the Steel Reapers, the angels of Portland's underworld. We failed to deliver the daughter, but if we have the boy who saved her, we have leverage. We trade him, force the father to choose. His daughter for the hero. What do you think he chooses?" Silence. Then the deeper voice. "Both. He chooses both and sends 50 men to take them. Then we negotiate from a position of strength. The boy is our insurance policy. Find him." Emmett stopped breathing. The words reassembled themselves in his mind, each one clicking into place with the precision of a locking mechanism. They were not just hunting him to silence a witness. They were hunting him to use him, to capture him and offer him as bait to dangle his life in front of Maeve's father and force a choice that would drag her back into danger. Because of him, because he had stepped out of the shadows with a stick in his hands and changed the equation, and now his existence was a variable that endangered the only person he had tried to protect. Flashlight beams swept across the underside of the bridge. They moved in systematic patterns, covering ground with the efficiency of men who had done this before. The beams illuminated the sleeping forms of other homeless people, the shopping carts and tarp shelters and cardboard nests that constituted the architecture of destitution. Emmett rolled off his cardboard in absolute silence. Years of practice, years of becoming nothing at a moment's notice. He pressed himself flat against the concrete support pillar, fitting his body into the shadow where the column met the ground. The beams came closer. Check behind those pillars. Footsteps. Right toward him. Emmett closed his eyes and became invisible. The man stopped directly in front of the pillar. So close, Emmett could smell him. Cigarettes and leather and expensive cologne and gun oil. The flashlight beam played across the concrete inches from Emmett's face, illuminating the graffiti and the grime and the small dark stain where rain had carried pigeon droppings down from the overhead structure. 10 seconds. The longest 10 seconds of Emmett's life. The man's radio crackled. Anything negative. Just junkies and trash. Keep looking. He is wounded. He cannot have gone far. The footsteps moved on. The beams swept it elsewhere. Emmett waited. His lungs burned. Stars danced at the edge of his vision. He held his breath until holding it any longer would have meant unconsciousness, then released it through his nose in a thin, controlled stream. Around him, the camp was stirring. Other homeless people roused by the flashlights and the voices were gathering their belongings and melting into the darkness. They knew the rules. When trouble comes, you vanish. You do not watch. You do not help. You disappear and hope the trouble was looking for someone else. No one stays. No one helps. You are on your own. Emmett waited until the flashlights were gone. Then he grabbed his stick and his sleeping bag and crawled away from the bridge on his belly, moving through the darkness with the slow, deliberate stealth of a boy who had spent 8 months learning to move without being seen. He could not stay under the bridge. They knew about it now. They would come back at dawn or before dawn with more men and better equipment. Thermal scopes, maybe. Dogs. Things that invisibility could not defeat. He needed somewhere bigger. Somewhere with so many hiding places that even a systematic search would take days. The old rail yard on the eastern edge of the industrial district. A graveyard of rusted boxcars and shipping containers stacked in towers spread across 30 acres of abandoned tracks and crumbling infrastructure. Dangerous territory claimed by different groups at different times, but vast enough that a boy who knew how to be quiet could disappear inside it for weeks. Emmett moved through the pre-dawn streets in the rain. Alley to alley, shadow to shadow, his side burned with every step, the wound pulling and tearing, fresh blood seeping through the jacket he had pressed against it. He was leaving a trail he knew. Dark drops on the wet pavement that the rain would wash away eventually, but not immediately. By the time he reached the rail yard, the eastern sky had begun its slow transformation from black to deep purple. The rain had stopped, leaving every surface wet and gleaming under the industrial lights. Emmett slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence and disappeared into the forest of rusted steel. He found a boxcar and a forgotten siding. The door was jammed half open, just wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, it smelled of decay and rust and the particular mustiness of spaces that had been abandoned so thoroughly that even rats had lost interest. Sections of the floor had rotted through, exposing the tracks below. Emmett found a solid corner and collapsed into it. He pulled the sleeping bag around his shoulders and the burlap sacks he found scattered on the floor over his legs. Fever had begun to set in. His skin felt too tight. His teeth chattered despite the layers. The darkness around him pulsed and breathed with shapes that were not there. He clutched the hickory stick against his chest. "You should have walked away," he whispered to himself. His voice echoed in the empty car, came back to him, sounding thin and strange. "You could be safe right now." But even as he said it, he knew there was no safe. Not in Pemberton's house, where safety was a lie told with a smile and enforced with a locked door. Not in the system, where safety was a file number and a statistic. Not even on the streets, where safety was just the temporary absence of immediate violence. "I am not like Pemberton," Emmett whispered through chattering teeth. "I do not look away." The fever pulled him under. His grip on the stick loosened, but did not release. Even in delirium, even in the shaking, sweating darkness of infection and exhaustion, his fingers stayed wrapped around the only thing he owned, the only thing that had kept him alive, the only friend he had in a city of 600,000 people who did not know his name. 3 miles west in the Steel Reapers clubhouse, Maeve Calloway was not sleeping either. She sat at a folding table that Spark had converted into a command station. A map of Portland was spread across the surface marked with red circles at every known homeless camp, every shelter, every bridge encampment, every abandoned building where a wounded teenager might seek refuge. Blue lines traced the routes between them, showing search patterns she had assigned to pairs of riders who were already out in the city working through the rain and the dark. Her phone was hot from use. She had been on calls for hours, Spark running digital traces, Officer Whitfield providing police scanner updates, Judge Morrison's clerk who had been woken from sleep and was not happy about it, but who understood that when a Calloway called you answered. The warrant on Emmett Brannigan had been withdrawn 40 minutes ago. Judge Morrison's signature effective immediately. The juvenile delinquency charge was being reviewed and would be dropped by morning. Spark had also delivered the Pemberton file. 3 foster children currently listed at his address. Only one actually living there. The other 2 had run away months ago unreported because Pemberton was still cashing their monthly stipend checks. Federal foster care fraud. Enough to put him away for years if the right people received the evidence. Maeve had the evidence compiled and ready. She was not going to send it yet. Timing mattered. Leverage required precision. She looked at the map. Somewhere in this city, in the rain and the dark, a 17-year-old boy was bleeding and alone and being hunted by men who wanted to use him as a bargaining chip to get to her. Because of her. Because he had saved her life, and now his life was in danger because of the connection to her. She picked up a red marker and drew a line on the map tracing the route from the Textile District alley east toward the waterfront. He had run east. The camera footage confirmed that. He was wounded, which limited his range. He was smart, which meant he would avoid obvious shelters where people might recognize a new face. He would look for somewhere large, somewhere complex, somewhere with multiple exits and hiding places. Her eyes settled on the rail yard. Maeve circled it in red. She picked up her phone and called Flint. First light, she said. I want a full team at the Eastern Rail Yard. 4 bikes, 2 SUVs. I am coming with you. Flint's voice was careful. Your father might have opinions about that. My father can express his opinions when we get back. The boy has been brutalized by men his entire life. If he sees 20 bikers coming at him, he will run, and in his condition, running might kill him. He needs to see my face. I'm the only person in this city he has a reason to trust. A pause. Then Flint said, I will have the team ready at 5. Maeve hung up. She stared at the red circle around the rail yard for a long time. Then she picked up a second marker, blue this time, and wrote a single word next to it. Emmett. When he opened his eyes, she intended to make sure the world looked different than it had when he closed them. No warrant, no Pemberton, no system waiting to swallow him whole. Just a choice, a real choice, the first one anyone had ever given him. She owed him that much. She owed him more than that. But a choice was where it started. Outside, the Portland rain resumed its patient work, washing the alleys clean, filling the gutters, erasing the bloodstains from the pavement where a boy with a stick had stood his ground and changed 2 lives forever. Maeve turned off the desk lamp, lay down on the clubhouse couch, and set her alarm for 4:30 in the morning. She did not sleep. She planned. Dawn came to Portland the way a bruise comes to skin, slow, discolored, spreading from the eastern horizon in shades of purple and sick yellow that gave the city the look of something that had been hit and was still deciding whether to get back up. Emmett Brannigan woke to the sound of his own teeth chattering. For a moment, he did not know where he was. The fever had turned the night into a series of disconnected images, memories shuffled out of order like a deck of cards thrown down a stairwell. Pemberton's basement, the alley, the knife, the girl's blood in the rain, a locked door, a scorpion tattoo, a hand reaching for him in the dark. Then the rust smell hit him, and the boxcar reassembled itself around him. The rotted floor, the jammed door letting in a blade of gray morning light, the burlap sacks over his legs, the sleeping bag wrapped around his shoulders damp with sweat. His side was on fire. He peeled back his jacket and looked at the wound. The shallow cut from the switchblade had become something else overnight. The edges were swollen and red, radiating outward in angry streaks that crawled across his ribs like the roots of some toxic plant. The skin around the wound was hot to the touch and tight with fluid. Infection, real infection. The kind that killed people who did not have access to antibiotics in sterile environments, in the basic infrastructure of medical care that the rest of the world took for granted. Emmett pressed the jacket back against his side and forced himself to sit up. The world tilted, steadied, tilted again. His vision was doing something strange, pulsing at the edges, contracting and expanding with his heartbeat. He gripped the hickory stick and used it to lever himself to his feet. His legs shook. His knees felt like they were filled with sand. But he stood. Outside the boxcar, the rail yard stretched in every direction. Rows of shipping containers stacked 3 and 4 high, creating canyons of rusted steel. Abandoned boxcars sitting on tracks that had not seen a locomotive in years. Concrete loading platforms crumbling at the edges. Weeds pushing up through every crack, the slow, patient work of nature reclaiming what industry had abandoned. Emmett needed water. He needed food. He needed antibiotics. He needed approximately 17 things he did not have and was not going to get, so he settled for what he could control. He studied the terrain. The rail yard was a maze, and mazes favored the small. Narrow gaps between containers that a lean boy could slip through, but a large man could not. Overhead routes along the tops of stacked containers that provided line of sight in every direction. Multiple exits north, south, east, through gaps in the perimeter fence. He memorized the layout the way a general memorizes a battlefield, because that was what it was about to become. They would come. He was certain of that. The men from the van, the smooth-voiced one, and the brute with the broken nose, and whoever else they brought with them. They would come because he was a loose end, and because they wanted to use him as leverage, and because men like that did not leave variables unresolved. Emmett heard them before he saw them. The crunch of gravel, methodical and deliberate, multiple sets of boots moving in a coordinated pattern that spoke of training and discipline. Not the random footfalls of scavengers or homeless people passing through. These were hunters working a grid. He pressed himself against the interior wall of the boxcar and peered through a crack in the rusted steel. 3 figures moved through the container canyon 50 yards to the south. The first was Voss. Emmett did not know the name, but he recognized the type. Lean, controlled, moving with the fluid economy of a man who had learned violence as a craft rather than a compulsion. He wore a tactical vest over dark clothing and carried a rifle with the casual comfort of an extension of his own body. Everything about him suggested professionalism, precision, a man who did not make mistakes and did not tolerate them in others. Behind Voss came Griggs, the brute from the alley. His nose was taped and both eyes were blackened from where Emmett's heel had rearranged the cartilage of his face. He moved with the rigid posture of a man held together by rage, a walking grievance looking for a target. He carried a combat knife in a thigh sheath and a pistol on his hip. Darnell brought up the rear, limping badly, his destroyed knee wrapped in a compression brace, using a length of pipe as a makeshift crutch. He had no business being in the field. His presence meant one of 2 things. Either they were short on manpower, or Darnell had insisted on being there for the satisfaction of watching the boy who had crippled him die. Emmett pulled back from the crack. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in the wound on his ribs, each beat pushing fresh pain through the infected tissue. 3 men, armed, professional, and he had a stick. He assessed his assets, the hickory staff, his knowledge of the terrain limited but growing, the fact that he was small enough to fit through spaces they could not. And one other thing, the thing that had kept him alive through 8 months on the streets and through Pemberton's house before that, he knew how to be hunted. Emmett slipped out of the boxcar through the gap in the rotted floor, dropping silently onto the gravel between the tracks. He moved on his belly beneath a line of coupled cars crawling through the cold, wet stones until he emerged 50 yards north of where he had started. Then he circled west, using the container stacks as cover, working his way behind the search pattern. They were moving south to north. He moved north to south, staying in their wake, occupying the ground they had already cleared. It was a simple principle. The safest place to be when someone is searching for you is where they have already looked. He found a position on top of a low container stack, 2 containers high, that gave him a view of the search corridor. He lay flat on the rusted metal roof, the cold biting through his jacket, and watched. Voss moved with precision, checking each container, methodically opening doors, sweeping corners with his rifle-mounted light. Griggs was less disciplined, kicking at debris, slamming his fist against container walls, his rage leaking out through every movement. Darnell limped behind, sweeping more slowly, his flashlight beam shaky. Darnell was the weak link. The injured leg made him slow. The pain made him distracted, and he was falling behind the other two, the gap between him and Griggs widening as the search progressed. Emmett climbed down from the container stack and circled wide, moving through a narrow gap between two rows of containers that was barely wider than his shoulders. Rust scraped against his jacket on both sides. The passage opened into a small clearing, littered with broken glass, discarded spray paint cans, and the remnants of someone's abandoned camp. Spray paint, a lighter he carried in his jacket pocket for warmth on cold nights. Glass bottles. Emmett looked at these objects and saw weapons. He picked up the spray paint can, shook it, half full. He grabbed two glass bottles and wedged them into his jacket pockets. Then he positioned himself behind a container at the end of a dead-end corridor and waited. Darnell's flashlight beam appeared at the corridor entrance 3 minutes later. The man was alone. Griggs and Voss had moved on to the next row, leaving Darnell to clear this one at his own damaged pace. Emmett waited until Darnell was deep into the corridor. Then he threw a glass bottle hard to his left. It shattered against a metal wall with a sound like a gunshot. Darnell spun toward the noise. His flashlight beam swung left. His hand went to his sidearm. Emmett stepped out from the right. He had 2 seconds, maybe less. He raised the spray paint can and depressed the nozzle, aiming directly at Darnell's face. The paint hit the man's eyes in a thick stream of flat black. Darnell screamed. His hands went to his face, clawing at the paint, the gun, and the flashlight, both forgotten. Emmett swung the hickory low and hard. The wood connected with Darnell's injured knee for the second time in 24 hours. The brace provided almost no protection. The joint, already structurally compromised, folded with a sound that was equal parts crack and wet pop. Darnell went down, screaming, a high, thin sound that bounced off the metal walls of the container corridor and echoed out across the rail yard. Emmett moved fast. He grabbed Darnell's radio from his belt, grabbed the pistol, a Glock, from his holster, felt the weight of it in his hands, heavy and real and terrible. Then he ran. Behind him, Darnell's screams brought the others at a sprint. Emmett ducked between containers, changing direction twice, 3 times, creating distance. When he was far enough away that his hands had stopped shaking from the encounter, he stopped and looked at the Glock. Full magazine, round in the chamber, safety off. The weapon was warm from Darnell's body, and it sat in Emmett's palm with the obscene weight of absolute power. He could kill with this. He could point it at a man and pull the trigger, and the man would stop existing. It was that simple, that irreversible. The radio crackled. "Darnell is down." Griggs's voice, thick with fury, distorted by the damaged cartilage in his nose. The little bastard took him out again. "He has Darnell's weapon and his radio." A pause. Then Voss spoke. His voice remained calm, measured. The voice of a man for whom setbacks were simply data points to be incorporated into a revised plan. "You have the radio, boy. You are listening. I know you are. So listen carefully. You have a gun now, good for you. But you will not use it because you are not a killer. I can see that in the way you fight. You attack legs, not heads. You use spray paint, not bullets. You are a survivor, not a predator. There is no shame in that. But it means you are holding a tool you will not use, and tools you will not use are just weight." Emmett pressed himself against a container and listened. Voss continued. "Let me tell you how this ends. We take you alive. We trade you. The girl's father, the one who runs the Steel Reapers, he thinks you are a hero. That means you have value. We offer you back to him in exchange for his daughter. He gets to play the noble protector. We get what our employer paid for. Everyone walks away." The smooth voice paused. "Or you make us work for it. You run. You hide. You force my man Griggs to find you, and I promise you the mood he is in right now, he will not be gentle. You have seen what he is. You have felt his knife. Imagine that, but slower. Much slower." Emmett looked at the Glock in his hands, looked at the radio, looked at the container walls rising around him like the walls of a steel labyrinth. The truth of what Voss was saying crystallized in his mind with terrible clarity. They did not just want him dead anymore. They wanted him alive, because alive he was a bargaining chip. Alive he was the tool they could use to drag Maeve back into the jaws they had built for her. If they captured Emmett, they would use his life to leverage hers. They would force her father to make an impossible choice, and regardless of which way that choice fell, Maeve would be in danger. Because of him. Because he had stepped out of the shadows with a stick and connected himself to her, and now that connection was a chain that the Sonora cartel intended to use as a leash. Emmett made a decision. He ejected the magazine from the Glock, racked the slide, catching the chambered round as it spun free. Then, with fingers that were clumsy from fever and cold, and the fine motor degradation that comes with blood loss, he field-stripped the weapon. He had seen it done once. An old veteran at the I-5 camp, a man named Wallace who had lost his mind to war, but whose hands still remembered the drills. Emmett had watched those hands disassemble and reassemble a Beretta with the mechanical precision of a machine over and over, a meditation practiced in muscle and metal. Emmett's hands were not as sure. He fumbled twice, but he got the slide off, got the barrel free, and found the firing pin. A small piece of machined steel no bigger than a pencil that was the difference between a weapon and a paperweight. He threw it as hard as he could. It arced through the gray morning air and pinged off a container somewhere in the maze, bouncing twice before disappearing into the weeds and gravel. The Glock was useless now. He reassembled it without the pin and set it on the ground. If they caught him, he would not be armed. He would not give them the excuse to claim self-defense. He would not give them a gun they could put in his dead hand and use to construct a story. But he would not be taken alive either. Not because of any death wish, because alive in their hands meant Maeve in danger. And that was a math problem with only one acceptable answer. Emmett gripped his hickory stick and began to climb. The shipping containers were stacked 3 high in the yard's central section, creating towers of corrugated steel that rose 30 feet above the gravel. The climb was brutal. His wounded side screamed with every upward movement, each pull on a container edge, sending bolts of white pain through his ribs. His hands slick with fever sweat, and dried blood kept slipping on the wet metal. The rust bit into his palms, leaving orange stains that looked like burns. But he made it to the top. From 30 feet up, the rail yard spread beneath him like a rusted chessboard. He could see the perimeter fence on 3 sides of the gap he had entered through the weed-choked access road that led to the industrial quarter. He could see the 2 remaining hunters, Voss and Griggs, working through the maze below with methodical patience, and he could see something else. In the growing light from this elevation, he could see the skyline of Portland to the west, the bridges spanning the Willamette, the green hills beyond. A city of 600,000 people going about their mornings, brewing coffee, driving to work, living lives that included walls and roofs and breakfasts and the assumption that the day would not end in violence. Emmett lay flat on the container roof and pressed his cheek against the cold metal. The sun was burning through the cloud cover, now weak but present, and it warmed his face for the first time in days. Below, Voss stopped. He raised his rifle and scanned the container stacks through his scope. The optics swept across the tops of the steel towers with slow, patient precision. Emmett stopped breathing. The scope passed over his position, stopped, came back. "I see you," Voss called out. His voice carried across the yard, calm and conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "Come down, kid. Make it easy." Emmett did not move. "Have it your way." 2 shots. The rifle cracked twice, the reports deafening in the open air. Sparks erupted from the container roof inches from Emmett's head. He scrambled backward, pressing himself flat, his heart hammering against the metal beneath him. Pinned, 30 feet in the air, with nowhere to go. Voss below, with a rifle. Griggs somewhere in the maze, climbing, hunting, carrying a knife and a grudge that had been sharpened by humiliation into something that went beyond professional duty into the personal. Emmett heard boots on metal, the clang of someone ascending a container stack to the south. Griggs, coming up. The radio on Emmett's belt crackled. Voss's voice directed at Griggs this time, but transmitted on the open channel. "Take him alive if you can. Break what you need to break. Legs, arms, ribs. But keep him breathing. He is worth nothing. Dead." Griggs did not respond on the radio. He did not need to. Emmett could hear him climbing each footfall on the container rungs, deliberate and heavy with intent. Emmett crawled to the edge of the container roof and looked down. The north side dropped 30 feet to open gravel. The south side connected to the adjacent stack through a narrow gap maybe 4 feet across. Beyond that stack, there was a lower section, 2 containers high, that led toward the perimeter fence. He could jump the gap. Maybe, if his legs held, if the fever did not steal his balance at the critical moment, if the wound in his side did not tear open and drop him into the space between the stacks, where he would fall 20 feet onto concrete and steel. Griggs's head appeared over the edge of the container to the south. Then his shoulders. Then all of him. He was enormous. 6.5 feet of gym-built muscle wrapped in a bomber jacket stained with his own blood from the broken nose Emmett had given him in the alley. His face was a landscape of damage. The taped nose, the blackened eyes, the swelling that distorted his features into something barely human. He held the combat knife in his right hand, the blade catching the early light. "End of the line, Rat," Griggs said. Emmett stood. His legs trembled. His vision pulsed. The hickory stick felt like it weighed 100 pounds in his shaking hands, but he raised it, held it in front of him with both hands. "I am not running," Emmett said. Griggs smiled. It was the worst smile Emmett had ever seen. Worse than Pemberton's. Pemberton smiled to deceive. Griggs smiled because he was about to do something he enjoyed. He charged. The container roof was 30 feet long and 8 feet wide. Not much room for a matador. Griggs slashed with the knife a wide horizontal arc aimed at Emmett's midsection. Emmett stepped back, sucking in his stomach, and the blade hissed through the air an inch from his jacket. He swung the stick, connected with Griggs's forearm. The impact jarred Emmett's wrists and sent a shockwave of pain through his wounded side. Griggs did not even flinch. He grabbed the stick with his free hand and pulled. Emmett held on, refused to release. Griggs yanked harder, dragging Emmett forward, reeling him in like a fish on a line. The knife came around in a backhand arc and caught Emmett's left arm above the elbow. The blade opened a cut that went through jacket and shirt and skin to the muscle beneath. Emmett cried out. His grip weakened. Griggs tore the stick from his hands and threw it aside. It clattered across the container roof and came to rest near the edge. Griggs grabbed Emmett by the front of his jacket and lifted him off his feet. The man's strength was grotesque, effortless, the kind of power that made resistance feel pointless. He held Emmett at arm's length the way a man might hold a rabbit before breaking its neck. The knife rose, positioned with precision. The blade aimed at Emmett's chest at the space between the third and fourth ribs, where the heart sat in its cage of bone. "Time to die," Kid Griggs said. Then the world split open. The sound came first. A low rumble at the edge of perception that grew rapidly into a roar, a mechanical avalanche, the combined thunder of multiple engines pushed to their limits. It cut through the morning air with a physical force that vibrated in the steel beneath their feet. Motorcycles. Smashing through the perimeter fence came a formation of headlights, 6 bikes riding in a tight V, followed by a massive black SUV, followed by 6 more bikes. The fence peeled away like aluminum foil. The bikes hit the gravel of the rail yard and scattered, each one breaking in a different direction, engines screaming. The Steel Reapers had arrived, but the figure on the back of the lead bike was not wearing a leather cut. She was wearing a denim jacket over a gray hoodie, her dark hair streaming behind her as the bike tore through the rail yard, and she was pointing, directing her arms, sweeping in a wide arc that sent the flanking riders spreading through the container maze. Maeve Calloway. She had been awake since 4:30. She had ridden the 20 minutes to the rail yard in the pre-dawn dark on the back of Flint's Harley, her arms wrapped around the sergeant-at-arms' midsection, her eyes scanning the industrial corridor for any sign of the white van or its occupants. She had positioned the teams at the perimeter herself, designating entry points, establishing a cordon. And when Spark relayed the sound of gunshots picked up by a microphone on a traffic camera, a quarter mile from the rail yard, she had given the order to breach. Below, Voss spun toward the approaching bikes. His rifle came up, acquired a target, and fired. A bike swerved the rider, ducking low. Return fire erupted from 3 directions at once. Sparks danced off the containers around Voss. He took a round in the left shoulder that spun him sideways and dropped him to one knee. The rifle fell from his hands. Voss looked at the wound, looked at the 12 armed bikers converging on his position. Made a calculation. His hands went up. On top of the container stack, Griggs heard the gunfire and the engines, but he did not stop. Did not look down, did not calculate. Calculation had been replaced by something simpler and older. His blackened eyes were locked on Emmett. His fingers tightened around the knife handle. The engines and the gunshots were sounds from another world. The only world that mattered was the 8 feet of rusted steel between his knife and the boy who had humiliated him. The knife began its descent, a single gunshot, not the crack of a rifle or the pop of a handgun fired at distance. This was something heavier, a deep concussive report that seemed to compress the air and push it outward in a visible wave. The sound of a large caliber weapon fired at close range. Griggs stopped. The knife froze 3 inches above Emmett's chest. The man's eyes went wide and confused, the rage draining from them like water from a shattered glass. He looked down. A dark stain was spreading across his bomber jacket from a point just left of center. The stain expanded quickly, blooming outward, and there was something almost organic about it, like a flower opening in terrible time-lapse. Griggs's knees buckled. The knife fell from his fingers and hit the container roof with a light musical sound that was obscenely delicate against the backdrop of engines and gunfire. He swayed, took 1 step backward. His boot found the edge of the container and found nothing beyond it. He fell, 30 feet. His arms reached for something to hold and found only air. He hit the gravel below with the sound of a heavy final thing coming to rest. Emmett lay on his back on the container roof, staring at the brightening sky. His mind had stopped processing. The transition from dead to alive was too abrupt, too absolute, like stepping through a door from a burning building into snow. A figure appeared at the top of the container ladder. Massive, leather cut dark with age and weather, face carved from granite and grief, a smoking pistol in one hand. Rowan Calloway looked at the boy on the roof and saw everything. The matted hair, the gaunt face, the clothes hanging off a frame that had not seen adequate nutrition in months, the blood soaking through the jacket, dark and spreading, the fresh cut on the arm still bleeding freely, the way the boy's chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths, the breathing of an animal that has been cornered and hurt and does not yet understand that the danger has passed. And the hickory stick, lying on the container roof 3 feet from the boy's hand. Even now, even after everything, the boy's fingers were reaching for it. Rowan holstered his weapon. He crossed the container roof and knelt beside Emmett. Up close, the boy was even smaller than he had looked on the security footage. His wrists were thin enough to snap. His cheekbones stood out like blades beneath skin that was gray with exhaustion and infection. Emmett's eyes were half open, glazed with fever, struggling to focus. He saw a blurred giant, saw leather and scars and a face that could have belonged to any of the men who had hurt him throughout his life. He flinched, Easy Rowan said. His voice came out different than he intended, softer, stripped of the command tone that was as natural to him as breathing. I am not going to hurt you. Emmett's lips moved. Sound came out thin and cracked. The girl. What, the girl? Emmett's hand found Rowan's wrist. His grip was pathetically weak. The grip of a boy who had nothing left. Is she safe, Rowan? Calloway had been an outlaw for 30 years. He had been shot twice, stabbed 3 times, had buried 7 brothers, had walked through violence the way most people walk through weather. He had not cried since he was 23 years old the night his own father died in a prison cell in Salem without anyone beside him. He cried now. A single tear tracked through the grime on his face. He did not wipe it away. She is safe, Rowan said. His voice broke on the word. Because of you. Emmett's eyes closed. His grip on Rowan's wrist loosened. The darkness took him. Rowan gathered the boy up, carefully, gently, mindful of the wounds and the thinness and the absolute fragility of 130 pounds of courage wrapped in skin and bone. He carried Emmett down the container ladder, 1 rung at a time, holding the boy against his chest with one arm, gripping the ladder with the other. At the bottom, Maeve was waiting. She took one look at Emmett's face, at the blood, at the gray pallor of his skin, and the part of her that was Rowan Calloway's daughter, the part that ran hot and wanted to break things, fell away. What remained was the part that calculated, that planned, that moved 3 steps ahead of crisis. Flint, she said. Her voice was steady, controlled, a voice giving orders, not asking questions. Bring the Escalade to this position. Now, Flint did not hesitate. The black SUV roared through the rail yard and skidded to a stop 10 feet from where Rowan stood holding Emmett. Maeve opened the rear door. Rowan laid the boy across the back seat. His head came to rest on a folded leather vest that Sledge had pulled off without being asked. Maeve climbed into the back beside Emmett. She pressed her hands against the wound on his ribs, feeling the heat of infection through the soaked fabric of his jacket. The blood was dark, almost black, sluggish in the way that meant the body was running out of reserves. Drive, Maeve said to Flint. St. Jude's, do not stop for anything. The Escalade launched forward. Flint put it at 90 miles an hour down the industrial corridor, running red lights forcing delivery trucks onto the curb. 6 motorcycles flanked the vehicle, blocking intersections, creating a moving corridor that nothing could penetrate. Rowan was in the front passenger seat. He turned to look at Maeve. She was bent over the boy, pressing on the wounds her hands already read. Her face held an expression he had seen only once before on the night her mother had gone into labor 3 weeks early, and the ambulance had been 20 minutes away. Focus without fear, determination distilled to its purest chemical form. Call St. Jude's, Maeve said, not looking up. Trauma team. Tell them knife wounds, blood loss, systemic infection. Tell them we are 7 minutes out and the patient is a 17-year-old male in septic shock. Rowan made the call. He delivered the information exactly as his daughter had specified in the tone and vocabulary she had prescribed, because in this moment she was the commanding officer and he was support, and he understood that without being told. Emmett stirred in the back seat. His eyes half opened, seeing nothing, and a sound came from his throat that might have been a word or might have been the random misfiring of a brain shutting down under the combined assault of blood loss and infection and trauma. His hand moved weakly, searching the leather beside him. He is looking for the stick, Rowan said, watching from the front seat. Maeve looked at Emmett's hand, at the fingers opening and closing on nothing. She reached down to the floorboard where Rowan had placed the hickory staff, splintered and bloodstained, retrieved from the container roof. She guided Emmett's hand to it. His fingers closed around the wood and his body relaxed, settling into the leather seat with the faintest exhalation. Maeve kept one hand on his wound and the other on his shoulder. Steady. Stay with me, Emmett, she said quietly. Her voice did not crack. She would not allow it to crack. You did not survive all of this to die in a car. Stay. The Escalade drifted sideways around the final corner tires, smoking, and slid to a halt at the emergency room entrance. Maeve was out of the vehicle before it stopped rocking. She pushed through the automatic doors, blood on her hands, blood on her jacket, and her voice filled the sterile white lobby with a sound that belonged to someone who had spent her life around men who moved mountains by speaking loud enough. I need a trauma team. Now. 17-year-old male, penetrating knife wounds to the left thorax and left upper arm, systemic infection from a 24-hour-old wound, probable sepsis, severe blood loss. He is in the vehicle outside and he is crashing. Move. Nurses moved. Orderlies ran. A gurney appeared and was wheeled to the SUV at a sprint. They transferred Emmett from the back seat to the gurney with practiced efficiency, and Maeve walked beside it through the double doors, her hand on his shoulder, until a nurse gently but firmly stopped her at the threshold of the trauma bay. Family only beyond this point, the nurse said. I am his family, Maeve said. The words came out with a conviction that left no room for argument. The nurse looked at her, looked at the blood on her hands, looked at the intensity in her eyes that was either love or insanity or some combination unique to people who have decided that another person's survival is not negotiable. The doors closed. The gurney disappeared. Maeve stood in the hallway with her bloody hands hanging at her sides and watched the light above the trauma bay door change from green to red. Then she pulled out her phone and went to work. The next 6 hours were the longest of Maeve Calloway's life, and she spent every minute of them in motion. She called Spark first. The warrant status, confirmed withdrawn. Judge Morrison had signed the paperwork personally that morning, effective immediately. The juvenile delinquency charge was in the process of being dismissed. She called Spark again. The guardianship filing. Spark had drafted the petition using a template from Morrison's clerk. Emergency temporary guardianship citing imminent danger in the absence of a suitable current placement. Morrison's office would process it as priority. She called Officer Whitfield. The rail yard scene. Whitfield confirmed that the investigation would be classified as a gang dispute. Voss had been taken into custody by Portland PD. The scene would be cleaned and closed. No mention of a teenage boy. She called Mrs. Thornton, the social worker assigned to Emmett's case. The conversation was brief and precise. Maeve explained the situation in terms that were legally accurate and emotionally devastating. A boy who had been failed by every institution tasked with protecting him. A foster parent with a documented pattern of abuse obscured by a system that believed adults over children. A warrant based on a fabricated theft charge. And a boy who, despite all of this, had risked his life to save a stranger. Mrs. Thornton listened. She asked questions. Maeve answered them with the controlled fluency of someone who had already anticipated every objection and prepared every counter. By the time Emmett came out of surgery, Maeve had dismantled and rebuilt the legal architecture of his life. The surgeon was a man named Dr. Eris, silver-haired, precise, with hands that had spent 30 years inside the bodies of people who arrived at his table already halfway gone. He came into the waiting room still wearing his surgical cap and found Maeve sitting in a plastic chair with her phone in one hand and a legal pad full of notes in the other. Rowan was beside her. He had changed clothes. Showered in the doctor's lounge because no one had been brave enough to deny him access. But his eyes were still haunted. He made it, Dr. Eris said. The rib wound was infected, but we debrided and cleaned it. The arm laceration required 42 stitches. He lost significant blood. We gave him 3 units. His system is fighting the infection, and he is on broad-spectrum antibiotics. He is stable. Maeve closed her eyes, opened in them. When can I see he is sleeping, heavily sedated. He will likely regain consciousness in a few hours. He is in recovery room 412. Maeve stood, gathered her legal pad and her phone, and walked toward the recovery wing without waiting for further information. Rowan followed. In the hallway outside room 412, Maeve stopped. She turned to her father. I need you to do something, she said. Turin, name it. When he wakes up, I am going to be there. I am going to explain what has happened. That the warrant is gone. That the charges are dropped. That Pemberton cannot touch him. I need you to come in after that. I need you to offer him the job, the apartment, the path. But I need you to understand that you are delivering my plan, not improvising your own. Rowan looked at his daughter. He saw the girl he had raised, the girl who had organized the club's financial records at 16, who had talked a federal investigator into dropping a subpoena at 19 by presenting a legal argument so precise the man had actually thanked her, who had in the last 24 hours orchestrated a rescue operation, a legal campaign, and a complete dismantling of the institutional machinery that had been grinding Emmett Brannigan into dust since he was 4 years old. Your plan, Rowan said. My hands, Maeve nodded. She walked into room 412 and sat down in the plastic chair beside the bed. Emmett was small beneath the white sheets. The hospital gown made him look younger than 17. Or maybe it was the absence of the oversized army jacket that had been serving as both armor and camouflage. Without it, he was just a boy. Thin arms, narrow shoulders, a face that cleaned of grime and blood, was younger than it had any right to be given what it had been through. An IV ran into his left arm. A monitor beeped in steady rhythm. The bandages on his ribs and his arm were white and clean and professional, the work of people who knew how to hold damaged things together. Maeve sat. She did not touch him. She did not speak. She waited. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Emmett's eyes opened. The first thing he saw was white. White ceiling, white walls, white sheets. The absence of pain, which was wrong. Pain was the constant, the baseline, the background noise of his existence. Without it, the world felt fraudulent. The second thing he heard was the monitor. Rhythmic, mechanical, beep, beep, beep. The third thing he smelled was bleach and lemon. Not the river, not the dumpster, not the sweet rot of the camps. Hospital. The panic hit him like voltage. Hospital meant doctors. Doctors meant records. Records meant the system. The system meant Pemberton. Pemberton meant the basement, in the dark, in the locked door, and the sound of footsteps on the stairs. He tried to sit up. His body refused. The IV tugged. The stitches pulled. He gasped. Easy. You will tear your stitches. Emmett froze. He turned his head slowly. Maeve Calloway sat in the plastic chair beside his bed. Her hair was washed. She wore a soft sweater, but her eyes were the same. The eyes from the alley, direct and fierce and currently filled with something that looked like relief but ran deeper than that. You, Emmett croaked. His throat felt like gravel. Maeve poured water from a plastic pitcher. held the straw to his lips. He drank. It was the best water he had ever tasted. "Where am I?" he asked. "St. Jude's." "You have been out almost 12 hours. You lost a lot of blood. How do you know my name?" "You told me to hide a gun and run. I decided to find out who you were instead." Emmett's eyes went to the door, to the window, calculating. Fourth floor, too high to jump. The IV would slow him. Maybe he could reach the stairs before anyone noticed. "Stop," Maeve said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I can see you mapping escape routes. You do not need them. The police are not coming. There is no warrant. There are no charges. You are not in trouble." Emmett stared at her. His face showed the particular expression of someone who has been told something they want desperately to believe but cannot afford to. "The warrant was withdrawn this morning," Maeve continued. "Judge Morrison signed it himself. The theft charge Pemberton filed is being dismissed. You are not a fugitive, Emmett. Not anymore." "How?" "Because I spent the last 12 hours making phone calls and filing paperwork and being very persistent with people who were not expecting a phone call at 4 in the morning." Emmett's hands were trembling. He pressed them flat against the sheets to make them stop. "Pemberton," he said. The name came out like something pulled from a wound. "Pemberton has no claim on you," Maeve said. "His custody authority has been suspended pending review. But there is more to it than that, and I want you to hear it from someone else." She looked toward the door. It opened. Rowan Calloway filled the doorframe. Emmett shrank back against the pillows. This was the man from the container, the man with the gun, the man who had killed Griggs with a single shot from 40 feet. He was terrifying in the way that mountains are terrifying. Not because they intend harm, because they are simply too large and too powerful to exist in the same space as something small. But the giant biker stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked at Emmett for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair around and sat backward on it, resting his arms across the backrest. The posture was deliberately casual, deliberately non-threatening. "You look better than you did this morning," Rowan said. His voice was quiet. "I am sorry," Emmett said, automatically. "I did not mean to cause trouble. I did not know she was your daughter." "You did not cause the trouble," Rowan said. "You finished it." He paused, let the words settle. Then he leaned forward. "Maeve tells me you need a place. A real place, not a shelter, not a bridge, not another house where the locks work from the outside." Emmett said nothing. His eyes were wide and wary. Rowan reached into his jacket and pulled out a key. Silver, small, gleaming under the fluorescent light. He placed it on the bedside table beside the water pitcher. "The Steel Reapers own a legitimate business, Saints Auto and Custom. We restore classic vehicles, build custom motorcycles. Legal work, real work. I need an apprentice, someone to learn the trade from the ground up. There is an apartment above the garage, studio. Small, but it is clean and it is warm, and it has a door that locks from the inside. The apartment is yours, rent-free. In exchange, you work 40 hours a week, you finish your GED, and you stay off the streets." Emmett stared at the key like it might detonate. Maeve spoke from her chair. "I will tutor you for the GED. I am finishing my degree at Portland State. I have the time and the patience, and you have the brains. I have seen what you can do under pressure. Academic pressure is nothing compared to what you have already survived." Emmett's eyes moved between them. The man, the woman, the key. "Pemberton," he said again. His voice was barely a whisper. He said I was worthless, a waste of space. He said nobody would ever want me. Rowan's face changed. The granite shifted. Something dark and dangerous moved behind his eyes. "Pemberton is a coward who locks children in basements because he cannot face himself in a mirror," Rowan said. "And if he ever comes within 10 miles of you, he will answer to me. You are not worthless, Emmett. You have something I cannot teach. I can teach anyone to fix an engine. I cannot teach a man to stand his ground when death is looking him in the face." He stood, extended his hand, scarred, calloused. The hand of a man who had built and broken things for 30 years. "This is not charity," Rowan said. "This is an investment. Do we have a deal?" Emmett looked at the hand, looked at Maeve, who was watching him with an intensity that held no pity, only conviction. Looked at the key. He reached out. His hand disappeared into Rowan's grip. "Deal," Emmett whispered. Rowan pulled a long, wrapped object from behind the chair, handed it to Emmett. Emmett unwrapped it. A staff, solid hickory, polished to a deep shine. One end capped in silver engraved with wolves running in a circle. The other end reinforced with a steel ferrule that gleamed under the hospital lights. A knight needs a proper sword, Rowan said. Emmett ran his fingers over the engravings. The wolves were detailed, each one distinct, running together a pack. His throat closed. Words would not come. His fingers traced the smooth wood, the craftsmanship, the weight of something made with care for someone specific. The door burst open. A woman in a hospital security uniform stood there breathing hard, her face flushed with the particular distress of someone delivering news they wish they did not have. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "there is a man in the lobby. He says his name is Pemberton. He says he is here to collect his ward. He says the boy belongs to him." The room changed. Emmett went rigid, every muscle in his body locked. The monitor beside the bed began to beep faster, the rhythm accelerating as his heart rate spiked. His breathing went shallow and rapid, the precise physiological response of a system that had been conditioned by years of trauma to prepare for impact at the sound of a single name. His hands shot out and closed around the silver-capped staff with a grip that turned his knuckles white. Maeve saw the terror in his eyes, saw the boy she had spent 24 hours fighting for transform in an instant, from someone touching hope for the first time into someone preparing to run, to fight, to do whatever the mathematics of survival demanded. She stood up. "Stay with him," she said to Rowan. Her voice was calm and clear. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except medical staff." Rowan looked at his daughter. In his world, confrontation was his domain. Had been for 30 years. Maeve held his gaze. "I built this," she said quietly. "Let me finish it." Rowan studied her face, saw the same steel he saw in his own mirror every morning, refined into something sharper and more precise. He nodded. Maeve looked back at Emmett. His eyes were wide and desperate, the eyes of a boy who had learned at 4 years old that when the adults said they would protect you, they were lying. "I will be right back," Maeve said. "And when I come back, he will be gone. Not for today, not for a while, forever. Do you believe me?" Emmett searched her face the way a drowning person searches the surface of the water for light. "I want to," he whispered. "That is enough," Maeve said. She turned and walked out of the room. Rowan locked the door behind her. In the hallway, Sledge and Flint fell into step on either side of her. Two men in leather cuts, each one capable of considerable violence, following a 20-year-old woman in a sweater toward a confrontation with a man who had spent years destroying children and getting away with it. Maeve Calloway walked toward the elevator. Her hands were steady, her mind was clear. And in her jacket pocket, her phone held every piece of evidence she needed to end Raymond Pemberton's career as a predator. She pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. The elevator doors opened onto the ground floor lobby of St. Jude's Hospital, and Maeve Calloway stepped out into the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people has collectively decided to stop breathing. The lobby was wide and bright floored in polished stone that threw back the fluorescent light in pale reflections. A reception desk ran along the far wall, staffed by two women who had stopped typing and were watching the scene in front of them with the frozen attention of people who understood that something was about to happen and that their job descriptions did not cover it. A security guard stood near the automatic doors, his hand resting on his radio, his body angled toward the exit as though he had already calculated his retreat route. Raymond Pemberton stood near the reception desk. He was exactly what Maeve had expected. Mid-50s medium build, wearing khaki pants and a blue polo shirt, with the collar turned up just slightly, a detail that was meant to project casual confidence, but instead projected the kind of studied ordinariness that predators cultivate. His face was soft in the way that certain men's faces go soft when they have spent decades performing kindness rather than practicing it. Gentle eyes. A smile that sat on his lips like something placed there deliberately, adjusted and readjusted until it achieved the correct ratio of warmth to concern. He was holding a manila folder. The folder was his armor, paperwork, bureaucracy, the institutional machinery that had protected him for years, that had absorbed the complaints of 3 children and ground them into dust, that had allowed him to collect government checks for children who had fled his house because the alternative was unthinkable. He looked up as the elevator opened. He had been expecting hospital administrators, social workers perhaps, people who spoke his language, who moved within the same system he had learned to manipulate. He was not expecting a young woman in a sweater with blood still under her fingernails, flanked by two men in leather vests, whose combined weight was roughly equivalent to a small automobile. Maeve crossed the lobby floor. Her boots made a measured sound on the stone. Not hurried, not aggressive, deliberate. The pace of someone who has already won and is simply walking toward the location where the other person will discover this. She stopped 10 feet from Pemberton, close enough to speak at a conversational volume, far enough that the space between them functioned as a stage visible to every person in the lobby. "Mr. Pemberton," Maeve said. Her voice carried the way sound carries in a cathedral shaped by the architecture into something larger than its source. "I understand you are looking for someone." Pemberton's smile recalibrated. He had expected a receptionist or a hospital administrator, or perhaps a police officer. Not this, but he was adaptable. Men who hurt children for years without consequence are always adaptable. "I am here for my foster son," Pemberton said. His voice was warm, practiced the voice of a man who had spent years convincing social workers and judges and neighbors that he was exactly what he appeared to be. "Emmett Brannigan. I was informed he was brought to this hospital. I have legal custody." He held up the manila folder, opened it, showed her the top page. A custody document bearing the state seal and his name in the guardian field. "All the paperwork is in order," Pemberton said. Maeve did not look at the paperwork. She looked at Pemberton's eyes. She had learned to read eyes from her father, who had taught her that a man's mouth could say anything, but his eyes operated on a different circuit, one connected to the parts of the brain that the conscious mind could not fully control. Pemberton's eyes were doing something his smile was not. They were scanning, evaluating, calculating the threat level of the two men standing behind her, the distance to the exit, the number of witnesses, the likelihood that this encounter was going to deviate from the script he had written in his head on the drive over. "Funny thing about paperwork," Maeve said. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. She held it up so that the screen faced Pemberton. On the screen was a document, a scanned copy of a court order bearing a judge's signature and that morning's date. "This is a withdrawal of the juvenile delinquency warrant issued against Emmett Brannigan 8 months ago. Signed by Judge Theodore Morrison, effective immediately. The theft charge you fabricated has been dismissed." Pemberton's smile did not change, but something behind it shifted. A tectonic movement invisible on the surface, but structural underneath. "I do not know what you think you know," young lady, Pemberton said, "but that boy stole money from my home and ran away in the middle of the night. I have been worried sick about him for 8 months. I reported the theft to protect him, to give the authorities a reason to find him and bring him home safely." "Home," Maeve repeated. She let the word hang in the air between them, let it turn slowly, let everyone in the lobby hear it and weigh it. "The way Jessica Whitmore described your home, it had a locked basement. She was 14 when she told a caseworker that you kept her down there for 2 days without food or water." Pemberton's face changed. The warmth drained from it, the way color drains from a screen when the power cuts. For just a moment, less than a second, Maeve saw what was underneath. Cold, rigid, the face of a man who had just realized that the conversation had departed from every scenario he had prepared for. "Those allegations were investigated and dismissed," Pemberton said. His voice was still warm, still steady, but the warmth had developed a brittle quality, like ice forming on the surface of water. "Dismissed due to insufficient evidence," Maeve said. "Not dismissed due to findings of innocence. There is a significant legal difference. Tyler Brooks, age 16, reported that you withheld food as punishment. Also dismissed. Insufficient evidence. Sarah Prescott, age 15. Her complaint was sealed, but the pattern is the same. Dismissed." She took a step closer. Sledge and Flint remained where they were. This was her ground. 3 children, Maeve said. 3 separate complaints. 3 dismissals. "You know what investigators call that pattern, Mr. Pemberton. They call it a system being worked by someone who understands it. Someone who knows exactly how far to push. Exactly how to make a child's testimony sound unreliable. Exactly how to present himself to caseworkers as the concerned, frustrated parent dealing with troubled youth. You are very good at it. You have had a lot of practice." Pemberton's jaw tightened. His hand, the one holding the manila folder, had developed a tremor. "This is slander," Pemberton said. "I could have my attorney file a defamation suit by tomorrow morning." "You could," Maeve said, "but you will not, because if you did, the discovery process would require you to open your financial records, and I do not think you want that." She swiped to a new document on her phone. "You currently receive monthly foster care stipends from the state of Oregon for 3 children registered at your address. Emmett Brannigan, a boy named Devin Sharp, age 15, and a girl named Lila Greer, age 14. Emmett has been living on the streets for 8 months. Devin ran away 6 months ago. Lila left 4 months ago, but you never reported either of them missing. You kept cashing the checks, 3 checks, every month. For children who were not living in your house, were not eating your food, were not sleeping under your roof." She lowered the phone. "That is federal fraud, Mr. Pemberton." "Not state, federal, because the foster care stipend program is partially funded by Title 4E of the Social Security Act, which makes falsifying placement reports a federal offense. I have the disbursement records. I have the dates. I have confirmation from 2 separate sources that Devin Sharp and Lila Greer have not been at your address for months. Everything is compiled and ready to be delivered." The lobby was silent. The receptionist had stopped pretending to work. The security guard was watching with his mouth slightly open. A nurse who had been crossing the lobby with a clipboard had stopped walking and was standing in the middle of the floor, making no effort to disguise her attention. Pemberton looked at Maeve, looked at Sledge and Flint standing behind her like columns of a building she had constructed, looked at the phone in her hand that contained the architecture of his destruction. "What do you want?" Pemberton said. The warmth was gone from his voice now. What remained was flat and gray, the voice of a man performing a calculation he had performed many times before, the calculation of self-preservation. "I want you to walk out of this hospital," Maeve said. "I want you to go home. I want you to pack whatever you value, and I want you to leave Portland tonight. Not next week, not tomorrow. Tonight. You cannot force me to leave the city," Pemberton said. But his voice wavered on the word force, cracking at the seam where conviction meets uncertainty. "No," Maeve agreed, "I cannot. But I can deliver this evidence package to the FBI field office on Southwest 3rd Avenue. I can also deliver it to the Oregonian's investigative reporting desk. I can additionally deliver it to every foster care advocacy organization in the state, along with the full complaints from Jessica Whitmore, Tyler Brooks, and Sarah Prescott, which I have obtained through channels you do not need to know about. By the time the news cycle is done with you, your name will be the first result on every search engine in the country. And then the federal investigation begins. And federal investigations into fraud involving the welfare of children do not end with dismissals due to insufficient evidence, Mr. Pemberton. They end with convictions." She paused. 60 seconds, Maeve said. "Walk away and disappear. Or stay and discover what it feels like when the system stops protecting you and starts prosecuting you." Behind her, Sledge cracked his knuckles. The sound was sharp and deliberate, a period placed at the end of Maeve's statement. Pemberton stood very still. His eyes moved from Maeve to the 2 bikers, to the phone, to the exit doors. The manila folder in his hand, the folder that contained the paperwork he had come armed with the institutional shield that had deflected every threat for years, hung at his side like something that had lost its weight. 20 seconds passed. Pemberton closed the folder. He straightened his polo shirt. He attempted to reassemble the smile, the mask, the performance that had carried him through 6 years of foster care placements and 3 complaints in a system designed to believe him. The smile would not hold. It kept slipping, like a picture hung on a nail that was pulling free from the wall. "This is not over," Pemberton said. "Yes," Maeve said. "It is." Pemberton turned and walked toward the exit. His steps were quick and uneven, the gait of a man whose body was trying to maintain dignity while his nervous system screamed at him to run. The automatic doors parted. He passed through them. The doors closed behind him. Maeve watched until he was gone, until the parking lot swallowed him, until the sound of his car starting and pulling away faded into the ambient noise of the hospital. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "Spark, the evidence package on Pemberton. The fraud documentation, the stipend, records, everything." "Ready to go," Spark said. "Send it, FBI field office, and copy the State Foster Care Oversight Board." A pause. He left. He is gone. You still want to send it? He left Portland, Maeve said. He did not leave the world. There are other cities, other foster systems, other children. Send it, all of it. He does not get to do this to anyone else. She hung up, turned to Sledge. Make sure he actually leaves, Maeve said. If he is still in the city limits at sunrise, call my father. My father, Joe, will know what to do with that information. Sledge smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing to do with happiness. Consider it handled. Maeve walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button for the 4th floor. The doors closed and she leaned against the wall and allowed herself for exactly 5 seconds to feel the tremor that she had been suppressing since she stepped out of the elevator downstairs. Her hands shook. Her jaw ached from clenching. Her heart was beating at a rate that would have concerned the nurses on the cardiac ward. 5 seconds. Then she straightened, breathed, let the tremor pass through her body and out through the soles of her boots into the elevator floor. The doors opened on 4. She walked to room 412 and knocked. Rowan opened the door. He searched her face. Gone, Maeve said, and the FBI gets the file in the morning regardless. Rowan studied his daughter. Then he stepped aside to let her in. Emmett was sitting up in bed. His face was ashen with anxiety, his hand wrapped around the silver-capped staff so tightly that the tendons in his forearms stood out like cables. His eyes locked onto Maeve as she entered wide and searching, looking for the truth in her face before she could speak it. He is gone, Maeve said. She sat down in the chair beside his bed. He will not be back. And I am not just saying that to make you feel better. I am saying it because I spent the last 10 minutes showing him exactly what his future looks like if he ever comes near you again, and I have already sent the evidence to the people who will make sure it happens. Emmett searched her face the way he had searched it before looking for the lie, the false hope, the gap between promise and reality that had defined every adult interaction in his 17 years. He did not find it. Something broke open in his chest. Not violently, not all at once, but in the way a frozen river breaks in spring cracks, spreading outward from a single point until the whole surface shifts and the water underneath the water that had been moving all along finally sees the sky. Tears spilled down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. He did not hide them. For the first time since he was 4 years old, standing in a bathroom doorway, looking at his mother's body on the cold tile floor, he let someone see him cry. Maeve moved to the edge of the bed. She put her arms around him carefully, mindful of the stitches, the IV, the bandages, the accumulated damage of a life spent being broken by the people who were supposed to hold him together. You are safe, Maeve said quietly. That is not a promise that expires. That is a fact. Rowan stood by the window looking out at the city. He did not speak. He did not need to. His daughter had built the fortress. His job was to stand on the wall and make sure nothing got through. After a while, when the tears had stopped and the monitors had returned to their steady rhythm and the room had settled into the particular quiet that follows the end of a long and terrible siege, Rowan turned from the window. Rest, he said. Physical therapy starts tomorrow. And I warn you, the therapist does not accept excuses. 2 weeks from now, you start at the shop. There is a 67 Chevelle that needs a complete engine rebuild. You are going to learn every bolt. He paused at the door. His granite face softened into something that was not quite a smile, but was closer to one than most people ever saw. Welcome home, Emmett. The door closed softly behind him. Maeve stayed. She sat in the plastic chair beside the bed and opened her textbook, a dense volume on constitutional law that she had been reading before all of this started, before an alley and a stick and a boy who refused to look away had rearranged the architecture of her life. She read. Emmett slept. The monitors beeped. Outside, the Portland rain resumed its patient work on the streets and the rooftops and the bridges, washing everything clean, one drop at a time. 6 months later, the Portland rain drummed its steady rhythm on the tin roof of Saints Auto and Custom, and Emmett Brannigan stood at the main workbench, wiping down a socket wrench with a red shop rag, and he looked like a different person. The ghost was gone. The gaunt, hollow face had filled out. Regular meals 3 a day, sometimes 4, when Rowan decided the boy needed feeding and showed up with barbecue or pizza or the enormous sandwiches he ordered from a deli on Hawthorne that piled meat so high the bread was merely decorative. Emmett's blonde hair was cut short and clean. His shoulders had broadened from months of lifting engine blocks and torquing lug nuts, and the general physical labor of a working automotive shop. He wore a gray mechanic's jumpsuit with his name embroidered in red thread over the left pocket. Emmett, his name sewn onto something that belonged to him, worn on a body that finally felt like his own. He had passed the GED exam 3 weeks ago. Maeve had tutored him 4 nights a week for 5 months, sitting at the small table in his studio apartment above the garage, working through mathematics and grammar in the essay section that had nearly defeated him, until she showed him that writing was just thinking out loud on paper, and he already knew how to think. The score was not just passing. It was high. High enough that Maeve had mentioned casually, as if the idea were just occurring to her, that community college scholarships existed for students with demonstrated resilience and non-traditional backgrounds. Emmett had not responded to that. Not yet. One thing at a time, one day at a time. The future was a country he was still learning to believe in. The silver-capped hickory staff leaned against the workbench beside him. He did not need it for protection anymore. The wound on his ribs had healed into a thick, jagged scar that pulled slightly when he twisted. The cut on his arm was a pale line that would fade further with time, but never disappear completely. He carried the staff because it was his, because it meant something, because the wolves engraved on the silver cap reminded him of what Rowan had said in the hospital. A knight needs a proper sword. The other mechanics had started calling him the Shepherd, a nickname that had emerged organically from the way Emmett moved through the shop, checking on things, noticing when a tool was out of place or a project was stalling, or one of the younger prospects was struggling with a task and too proud to ask for help. He shepherded. It was in his nature. The same instinct that had driven him out of the shadows in that alley, the refusal to look away, had simply found a new and less violent expression. Life was good. Life was stable. Life was everything he had never had and had stopped believing was possible. And that was the problem. It started small. A missed GED study session. Maeve texted him at 7. He replied that he was tired, that he would make it up tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and he missed that session too. Then a third. He began staying late at the shop. Not because there was work to do, but because work was safe. Work was mechanical. Work did not require him to sit across a table from someone who cared about him and pretend that he deserved it. He stopped eating dinner with the Callaways. Rowan had established a standing invitation. Wednesday nights, the house on the hill above the industrial district, a modest craftsman with a wraparound porch and a kitchen that smelled like garlic and wood smoke. Emmett had attended every week for 4 months. Then he missed one, then two, then he stopped going entirely. He stopped answering Maeve's calls, responded to her texts with single words. Fine, busy, later. He worked 12-hour days, 14. He rebuilt the Chevelle engine and then tore it down and rebuilt it again, not because it needed rebuilding, but because the act of disassembly and reassembly was a meditation, a way of imposing order on a universe that he was increasingly certain was going to snatch the floor out from under him at any moment. He was waiting for it. The other shoe, the reversal, the moment when Rowan would decide the investment was not paying off, or Maeve would get bored, or the system would reach out its long institutional arm and pull him back into the machine. Every good thing he had ever been given had been temporary. Every promise had been a loan with interest. Every safe place had been a cage with a delayed lock. He was 17 years old, and he had never in his life experienced kindness that did not eventually transform into something else. Maeve noticed. Of course she noticed. She had been watching Emmett the way a field medic watches a patient after surgery, checking for the signs of complications that appear not during the crisis but after it, when the body has time to process what happened to it and the mind begins its long, unreliable reckoning with trauma. She gave him space for 2 weeks, watched, waited, assessed. Then, on a Thursday evening in October, with the rain falling hard enough to drown conversation outside, she walked into the shop at 8 o'clock and found Emmett at the workbench rebuilding a carburetor for the third time, his hands black with grease, his eyes ringed with the dark circles of someone who was not sleeping. The shop was empty. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. "We need to talk," Maeve said. Emmett did not look up from the carburetor. "I am busy. You have rebuilt that carburetor twice already. It was perfect the first time." Emmett's hands stopped moving. He stared at the disassembled pieces on the bench. Float bowl, needle valve, accelerator pump. The anatomy of a machine laid out in precise order, every component accounted for, every function understood. Machines made sense. Machines did not change the rules. Machines did not pretend to care about you and then lock you in a basement. Emmett, what? Look at me. He did not want to. Looking at Maeve required honesty, and honesty required vulnerability, and vulnerability was the one thing Emmett Brannigan had spent his entire life fortifying himself against. Vulnerability was the crack in the wall that Pemberton had exploited. Vulnerability was the open window that the system climbed through. But he looked. Maeve was standing 3 feet away. She was not angry. She was not disappointed. She was not wearing the expression of someone about to deliver an ultimatum. Her face held something worse than any of those things. It held understanding. You have not answered my calls in a week, Maeve said. You have missed 3 study sessions. You have not come to dinner in a month. You are working yourself to exhaustion in a shop that closes at 6. And I need you to tell me what is happening. Nothing is happening, Emmett said. The words came out flat and practiced the tone of a boy who had spent years telling caseworkers and counselors and judges that everything was fine because fine was the word that made people stop asking questions. Maeve did not stop. You are pulling away, she said. You are building distance between yourself and every person who has tried to get close to you in the last 6 months. And I need you to understand something, Emmett. I see what you are doing, and I know why. You do not know anything about me, Emmett said. The words came out harder than he intended, edged with something that was not quite anger, but lived in the same neighborhood. I know that every home you have ever been placed in has hurt you, Maeve said. I know that every adult who said they would take care of you eventually proved that promise was conditional. I know that you are 17 years old and you have never once experienced permanence. So now you have something good and your brain is telling you that good is temporary, that the longer you stay, the worse it will hurt when it ends, and the safest thing to do is leave before you are left. Emmett's jaw tightened, his hands clenched around the edge of the workbench. Maeve took a step closer. You are not pulling away because you do not care about us, she said. You are pulling away because you do care. And caring terrifies you because caring is what made Pemberton's betrayal possible. You cannot be hurt by people who do not matter to you. So you are trying to make us not matter. You are trying to push yourself out the door before we push you, because at least that way you control the exit. Stop, Emmett said. His voice cracked. No, Maeve said. I will not stop. Because what you are doing right now is not survival. It is not self-protection. It is surrender. You are letting Pemberton win. Right now, 6 months after you escaped him with a job and a home and people who care about you, you are giving him exactly what he wanted. He wanted you to believe you were worthless. He wanted you to believe that nobody would ever want you. And right now, standing in this shop at 8 o'clock at night, rebuilding a carburetor that does not need rebuilding, you are proving him right. The words hit Emmett like a physical impact. He felt them land in his chest and detonate there, blowing open doors he had sealed shut years ago. You do not understand, Emmett said. His voice was barely audible. Every place I have been, every person who said this is your home, they all said it the same way, the same words. And then one day the caseworker shows up with a garbage bag for your clothes, and you are in a new car going to a new house with new people who say the same words. This is your home, and you learn that those words do not mean what they are supposed to mean. They mean we will keep you until we decide not to. His hands were shaking. The carburetor parts rattled against the bench. I am not stupid, Emmett continued. I know what you and Rowan have done for me. I know it is real. I know it is more than anyone has ever given me, and that is why it terrifies me. Because the more real it is, the more it will destroy me when it ends. And it always ends. Maeve stood very still. She let his words settle in the space between them, gave them room to exist without challenge or correction. Then she spoke. I am not going to tell you it will never end, Maeve said. I am not going to make a promise about forever, because forever is a word that people use when they want you to stop asking questions. I am going to tell you what is true right now, tonight in this shop. You matter to me. You matter to my father. You mattered to the men in this club who watched you fight 3 armed men with a stick and decided that anyone with that much courage deserves a place at the table. She paused. And I am going to tell you something else, something harder. Staying is a choice you have to make every day, not once, every single day. It is harder than fighting. It is harder than running. It is harder than anything you did in that alley or on top of those containers. Because fighting is one moment of courage. Staying is courage repeated. She met his eyes. You stepped out of the shadows to save my life. I am asking you to do something harder. Stay in the light, and you do not have to do it alone. Emmett stared at her. The shop was quiet. The rain drummed on the tin roof above them. The fluorescent lights buzzed their constant, indifferent hum. The carburetor parts lay scattered on the bench between them, each one a small, precision machine component designed to work only in concert with every other piece. Separate, they were inert. Together they created combustion, motion, power. Emmett looked at the parts, looked at Maeve. I do not know how to stay, he said. His voice was small. The voice of a boy, not a survivor, not a fighter, just a boy. Neither did I, Maeve said. When my mother left, I was 9. I spent 3 years waiting for her to come back. 3 years of checking the mailbox and watching the driveway and sleeping with my shoes on so I would be ready when she walked through the door. She never did. And my father, this terrifying man in a leather vest, who other people crossed the street to avoid, sat on my bed every single night and said the same thing. I am here. That is not a prediction. It is a fact. I am here tonight. Tomorrow night I will be here again, and we will keep going. She touched the carburetor float bowl on the bench, turning it gently with her finger. I am here, Emmett, Maeve said. That is not a prediction. It is a fact. The shop was silent except for the rain. Emmett picked up the float bowl, picked up the needle valve, began reassembling the carburetor with slow, careful hands. Maeve watched but did not help. This was his process, his way of putting things in order. She understood that about him, that the work of his hands was the language his mind used to process what his mouth could not say. When the carburetor was assembled whole and functional, he set it on the bench and looked at her. I missed 3 study sessions, Emmett said quietly. 4, Maeve corrected. The smallest flicker of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. The memory of what a smile felt like surfacing for the first time in weeks. Can we start again tomorrow? He asked. 6:30, Maeve said. Bring pizza. You owe me 4 sessions worth. Emmett nodded. He picked up his staff from where it leaned against the workbench, held it for a moment, feeling the weight that balanced the wolves under his thumb. Then he headed for the stairs that led to his apartment, and Maeve walked with him as far as the shop door, and they said goodnight without ceremony, because ceremony was not what they needed. What they needed was ordinary. The ordinary rhythm of people who would see each other again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, not because of a dramatic rescue or a life debt, or any of the extraordinary things that had brought them into each other's orbit, but because that was what family did. They showed up. They kept going. Maeve drove home through the rain. Her headlights cut through the dark streets, and the wipers beat a steady rhythm, and she kept both hands on the wheel, and she did not cry until she pulled into her father's driveway and parked and turned off the engine and sat in the dark car for 3 minutes, with her forehead against the steering wheel and her shoulders shaking. She cried because it had worked. She cried because it might not have. She cried because she was 20 years old, and she had spent the last 6 months pouring herself into the reconstruction of a human being who had been systematically demolished since the age of 4. And the weight of that, the sheer gravitational mass of caring that much about someone that broken, was something she had not allowed herself to feel until this moment. 3 minutes. Then she wiped her face, got out of the car, and went inside to tell her father that the boy was going to be okay. The weeks that followed were quiet, and the quiet was not empty. It was full. Emmett came to the study sessions. He came to Wednesday dinners. He sat at the table in the Callaway kitchen with Rowan and Maeve and Sledge, who had become a regular Wednesday fixture because the man would drive 40 miles through a blizzard for Rowan's garlic bread, and he ate, and he listened, and occasionally he spoke. He did not transform overnight. There were still mornings when he woke at 4 a.m. in a cold sweat, his hand reaching for the hickory stick before his conscious mind had assembled the room around him. There were still moments when a door closing too hard or a voice raised too sharp would send a jolt through his nervous system that took minutes to subside. The scars on his body healed. The scars inside operated on a different timeline, but he stayed. Every day he made the choice to stay. And every day the choice got a fraction easier the way a path through dense forest gets clearer with each passage. Not because the forest changes, but because the walker learns where to step. He rebuilt the Chevelle, not 3 times, once, properly. Rowan inspected the engine, turned the key, listened to the 8 cylinders fire in perfect sequence, and nodded. Not bad, Rowan said, which was the highest praise in his vocabulary, and which Emmett understood from 6 months of study was equivalent to a standing ovation from anyone else. He passed his driving test on the first attempt. Maeve rode with him to the DM5 and waited in the plastic chairs, and when he came out holding the temporary license with the photo that showed a young man who looked nothing like the mugshot from 2 years ago, she hugged him and said, "Now we get you a bike." Rowan was already working on one. A vintage Yamaha he had been restoring in the back bay of the shop, telling Emmett it was a customer project, which was a lie that everyone in the shop knew about and no one contradicted, because the look on the boy's face when he eventually discovered the truth would be worth every hour of secret labor. On a Tuesday evening in late November, exactly 7 months after a boy with a stick had stepped out of the shadows in an alley in the textile district, Emmett Brannigan finished his shift at Saints Auto and custom cleaned his tools, hung his jumpsuit in his locker, and climbed the stairs to his apartment. The apartment was small, a studio with a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that produced hot water on demand, and a bed with a mattress and sheets and a pillow that did not smell like mildew or someone else's misery. There was a desk against one wall where his GED study materials still sat in a neat stack beside a laptop that Maeve had given him as a graduation present. There was a shelf with a few books, novels mostly that he had started reading on Maeve's recommendation, and found that he loved with a ferocity that surprised him. There was a small frame photograph that Sledge had taken of the 3 of them, Emmett, Maeve, and Rowan, standing in front of the shop on the day Emmett's name was embroidered on his first jumpsuit. In the photograph, Rowan's face wore its customary granite expression. Maeve was smiling, and Emmett looked startled, as though the camera had caught him in the act of discovering something unexpected about himself. He walked to the window and looked out. The rain had stopped. For the first time in what felt like weeks, the clouds had pulled apart and the city was visible beneath them, spread out in a carpet of electric light that reflected off every wet surface and turned the streets into rivers of amber and white. The bridges over the Willamette glowed like the spines of sleeping animals. The hills to the west were dark shapes against a sky that was for once showing stars. His hickory staff leaned against the wall beside the window. The silver cap caught the light from the street lamp outside and threw a small constellation of reflections across the ceiling. Emmett touched the scar on his ribs through his shirt, a thick raised line that traced the path of a blade wielded by a man who was now dead. The scar would never fully fade. It was part of him now, the way the staff was part of him, the way the nightmares were part of him, the way Maeve's voice saying "stay in the light" was part of him. He was not the same person who had sat in a recessed doorway on 4th Avenue 8 months ago, invisible, waiting for a girl to park her Jeep so he could pretend for 60 seconds that he existed in the same world she did. He was not the person who had run from Pemberton's house with nothing but the clothes on his back and a decision that the open air was safer than a locked room. He was not the person who had stood on top of a shipping container with a stick in his hands and the absolute certainty that he was about to die. He was someone else now, someone still being assembled, still under construction, like the vehicles in the shop below, stripped down to their frames, rebuilt piece by piece, each component checked and tested and placed with intention. He pulled out his phone. The basic model that Rowan had given him for work, which Maeve had replaced a month ago with something better, because she said a person needed to be able to look things up and apply for scholarships and text his family back in a reasonable amount of time. He opened the Notes app. He had been writing there for weeks. Not stories, not journals, just thoughts, fragments, pieces of the internal conversation that he was slowly, carefully learning to have out loud. He typed, "I used to be invisible. I thought that was survival. But I was wrong. Invisibility is not survival. It is erasure. Every day I spent hiding, I was not protecting myself. I was deleting myself, line by line, memory by memory, until there was almost nothing left. The day I stepped into that alley, I stopped erasing. I did not know what I was stepping into. I did not know who she was. I did not know that a wooden stick and a decision to stop looking away would lead to an apartment in a Guam, and a family and a future that I still have to remind myself is real. Every morning when I open my eyes and the ceiling is white instead of concrete, and the air smells like coffee instead of river water, I know now that courage is not a single act. It is not the moment you step out of the shadows. That is the beginning. Courage is what comes after. Courage is staying when every cell in your body is telling you to run. Courage is trusting someone new after everyone who came before taught you that trust is just a setup for a different kind of pain. I am learning. I am slow at it, slower than I was at carburetors and engine timing in the GED essay section. But I am learning. My name is Emmett Brannigan. I am a mechanic. I am a brother. I am a student. I am someone's family. I am home, and I am never invisible again. He saved the note, set the phone on the desk, stood at the window for a while longer, watching the lights of Portland shimmer in the wet streets below. The city looked different from up here, smaller, warmer, a place where a person could build something and have it stand. Tomorrow he would go back to the shop. He would work on engines with men who called him Shepherd and meant it as a compliment. He would eat lunch on overturned milk crates with Rowan, who would hand him a sandwich and grunt something about a motorcycle that was almost ready, almost finished, almost his. He would study with Maeve in the evening, and she would push him on the essay writing because she believed he had something to say and the skill to say it, and he was beginning to believe her. He would make the choice to stay. Again, the same choice he had made yesterday and the day before that, and every day stretching back to the night in the shop when Maeve Calloway had looked at him and said, "Courage is not one moment, it is every moment after." But tonight he was just standing at the window, letting himself feel what he felt. Not analyzing it, not bracing against it, not waiting for it to be taken away. The city lights blurred through tears he did not bother to hide. Emmett the shepherd, the invisible boy who became a knight, the homeless kid who found a kingdom. He picked up his staff and held it close, felt the weight of the hickory, the smooth polish, the wolves running in their endless circle under his thumb, and he smiled.